Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coalition M. This is your host, Carson Lopez. Boy, tonight is going to be a fun night. I have an exceptional variety of guests in the studio tonight, including a very special guest, Mr. Daniel Ray, who has come all the way up here from Texas just to sit down and do this show with me. Dan and I both listen and contribute both financially and conversationally to Dogma Debate on Patreon. And so that's how we met. We got talking in the comments section, which eventually evolved into shooting each other like emails back and forth for a good week or so there. Mm-hmm. We talked quite a bit. And since I knew Dan was comfortable with talk shows, I asked if he'd be interested in coming onto mine, which he graciously accepted, which I gotta admit I wasn't expecting. I thought that I might ask just to be sure. But I also have a couple of former guests and my own roommate here to learn some things from and about each other and just have some great conversation with friends. But let me go ahead and shut up so I can let these folks introduce themselves in a little more depth. Dan, would you like to go first?
What would you like me to say?
You can say anything you like.
That's
Who are you, Dan?
I am going to be 50 next year.
Woohoo! What an awkward stage of life.
Yeah, I have. It is. It's weird because I don't feel that way. But I have been a Christian for almost half of my life. I have been all over the country. I've been all over the world with the military. I am now apparently getting divine deployments here in the last couple of years. I've been on, this will be my 8th podcast with, this is an interesting combination. This is the first one I've ever done, but I've enjoyed dialoguing with atheists, unbelievers, and skeptics, people with different theological opinions and beliefs than I have. I never would have ever thought that I would do anything like this because I'm very shy and timid and don't like confrontation that much. So I don't go out of my way to like make people feel uncomfortable, or, and so the dialogues that I have with people that disagree with me, I'm just I got my training wheels on, so I enjoy these things, and God seems to be stretching me on a personal level by having me do these things. So I was on Dogma Debate twice, and that really stretched me. I really enjoyed getting to know David and had a lot of opportunities since then. We are now enjoying, I brought pie for everybody, which was made famous on Dogma Debate twice.
It is amazing.
So David has had this pie, so this is famous pie.
So if you hear awkward chewing, that's me.
Yeah. Well, it's like a few people.
I had
David
to pause because it was
called
so
me the
good.
Apple Pie Apologist.
Yes, that's right.
And so that gets me into, I just finished my master's degree in Christian apologetics from Houston Baptist University last summer, and it was purely for fun. I got to study with an Oxford scholar who was a C.S. Lewis expert, and I did it purely for fun because I liked Narnia, and there was absolutely nothing practical about it.
Cool.
But after the end of the degree, I realized that I'm just, I'm talking to books and I'm writing, but I'm not really engaging people as much, especially people that don't quite see things the way I do. And so this has been a treat, and I hope it continues. And I look forward to more of these. So thank you for having me, Carson.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Honor. Really it is. Thank you.
Who else would like to go? Just pie in my mouth.
Well, I guess we can just go in the circle. I'm to the left. So my name's Caroline Ray, and
You're new here.
I am.
Kind of.
New on the show. I don't know which way.
Tell us what you do for the show. What you do for our show.
What do I do? What do you mean? I listen.
You take pictures.
Oh yeah. Oh, I also yes.
She was all the amazing fancy pictures that you see on the Facebook page. That's her.
Yep, that's me.
She did all that.
I take the photos. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I
cool.
used one of your pictures as my Twitter picture because it was so dang good.
Oh well,
It's
thanks.
such a great photo.
Shoot. That's what I do. I take pictures. I enjoy it.
So you will be taking a picture of every one of us here tonight, hopefully, right? Yeah, no?
Did you bring your camera?
I did not.
That's okay. Megan has hers.
Okay.
And her
cool.
tripod. She's ready.
Hey, there we go. So put on that 10-second timer, and then run back and pose, but not pose. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah.
It's a really good time.
Aside from that, I'm 25, almost. Well, I'm half 50, so.
You were Dan's age when he became a Christian.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
So
you got 25 years to go.
I don't know if there's a name for what I do, but I really I enjoy religion. I like to study as far as different denominations, and I really enjoy, I don't know, I guess kind of reading in between the lines, and really kind of questioning those hard facts and whatnot, and just, I don't know, take some remembrance of like, remember that really weird random fact over there in that Bible that nobody really ever paid attention to? Let's talk about that. So that's kind of my main thing. But yeah, so that's me.
Hello, my name is Jaron Moss. If you guys have been listening to, I was in one episode a while back.
He was in the Hollywood politics episode.
Yep. And I also edit the podcast for Carson after the show's over. I am 20 years old.
Hey.
I'll be 21 next year. But other than that, I come from a pretty religious household. So yeah, that's me.
What denomination? Is it Christian?
Oh yeah, Christmas. Or yes, Christmas.
That's
Christmas
a great denomination. Because Christmas.
No, yeah,
I want to join that one.
That's the reason
Where do
for
you
the
go to
season.
church? Every day is Christmas.
I would join that religion.
Yeah.
Well, we need
No,
to
I
make
wouldn't.
it
I hate
Christmas.
Christmas.
Yeah, we don't even celebrate Christmas.
So Jehovah's Witness,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
Mhm.
cool.
Oh, wow.
Cool. What about you, Emma?
I'm Emma. I was way earlier in the season. I think maybe the first episode of this season.
You were the first
Yeah.
episode of the semester.
I am a non-denominational Christian. I don't know, like I'm reading and I'm learning and becoming stronger in the faith every day, and I try to engage people and talk to people inside and outside my faith all the time, and it's very interesting seeing the world as a Christian. So I get to do that every day, and it's super fun.
All right. Well,
She
my
was
name
in Pie World for a while.
Yes.
it was a really emotional time.
It really was. This is another zone. What happened to Megan? She's in the pie.
Honestly.
I envy her.
So my name is Megan, and you've heard me on a couple times ranting about feminism, which is my favorite thing to do in my free time. I talked to Derek Steed, and I had a one-on-one with Carson where we talked about everything that
Yeah.
exists.
You were my very first guest, actually, when I first started this. So
That was such a good
she's
time.
Amazing, yeah.
That was awesome. We actually met in speech class, and she was worried that I would not take her feminism speech well because that was her informative speech. And then she saw me nodding, and she's like, "Excuse me?"
Yes, yes. I was very pleased to see that you approved.
So I've been a Christian my entire life. My family has gotten kicked out of a lot of denominational churches. I was a Nazarene for a time, and then I was it said they were non-denominational, but that they were a Baptist church. And now I am a Methodist to my very, very core of my soul. And my father now preaches at a non-denominational church that's actually right down the street from the church that I go to.
Okay.
And I love science, so
Science.
it's an interesting combination.
Well, I'm going to let Stephanie introduce herself in just a second. She's going to get a chair and pull up here in case she wants to butt in at any point. She's pretty quiet, so I don't know about that. But I don't usually say this, but I don't usually give too much about myself, but I personally grew up Catholic. I went K through 8. I was in a Catholic parish school, and then I went to public school in high school because I moved. And I was in high school. I was a non-denominational, I guess, for a couple years, and then I didn't like stop being a Christian or anything until maybe sometime last year, I would say. But like I stopped practicing it after like the 2 years. Like I would go to church all the time, but I didn't read the Bible. I wasn't really interested. It just seemed like too much, and so I didn't really look at it. Now I love to read it, which is really ironic, but I think it's super interesting. I started listening to Dogma Debate, and David Smalley really helped me kind of set my mind free and just let it wander and let it ask these questions and let yourself be uncomfortable. And it's okay to say the A word, atheist, and he really helped me get comfortable with where I am now. And so yeah, that's I'd say it's a good synopsis of where I am right now. Stephanie, you want to tell everybody, you've been on here as well, you've been on the show before as well, so why don't you say something, however you want to do this.
So I'm not too sure how loud I'm gonna be without the headset, but I'm Stephanie, and I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. Father was Catholic. Well, says he's Catholic. He's more of, I'll go to church when my mom makes me go to church. So I never really got to know too much of the Catholic side. I got more of the Jehovah's Witness. And last year as well, I started to question a bit of my beliefs, started to listen to the dogma debate, started listening to other atheists, started questioning my beliefs, and I'd like to say I'm probably atheist now.
Cool. Well, I guess just a first starter question for everybody. Well, actually, just to clarify real quick, Dan, you weren't born into a Christian family, right?
No, I had no religious upbringing whatsoever.
Okay. Caroline, you were?
I was Presbyterian.
Jaren, you were?
Might as well have been, yes.
Yeah. And Megan and Emma, you were as well.
Yes.
And then I was too. Okay, cool. So for everybody who stayed with their denomination in Christianity, why did you stay? That includes you, Dan. Or why Christianity, I guess, for you in particular.
Okay. Yeah, I was 25, as Caroline is. And I had a girlfriend, and she wanted to take me to church, and I was more interested in, a relationship with her. And I was in a pretty good point in my life. I've had, all my life, I've struggled with depression, but it's always been manageable. I've always sought counseling for it and everything. So I wasn't in a crisis period, but I moved out of Los Angeles because I was living in the middle of L.A. During the Rodney King riots. Many of you were probably not around in 1990.
Does anybody else know about the Rodney King riots?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
93. No, wait, is it? What? 92. 1992.
When I was born.
April of 92. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and basically, we see these terrible videos of these police officers and these clashes with African Americans and other people that has become all too common. The Rodney King was tipped off by a video that was taken of a gentleman, Rodney King, who was beaten by Los Angeles police officers unmercifully. And the trial went to court, and there were 4 of the police officers involved who were acquitted. And that just sent the city of Los Angeles into an uproar. And it was a literal civic riot. I've never seen anything like it in my life. So I moved out of L.A., and I met a gal. I went back to college, and she invited me to church. And long story short, I ended up getting baptized in that church, and she ended up breaking up with me. But Jesus stuck around. And 25-year-old guy who goes to church just for his girlfriend, and the girlfriend leaves, you think the guy's just going to... That's the end of church. But really, it was more of like, no, that I really... Something happened to where I recognized the Bible was God's word, and Jesus was the Lord. He was God, and he wanted me to read the Bible, and he had stuff for me to do. It was kind of like a gradual sort of conviction realization. I wasn't looking for religion or God or anything, and Jesus the Father. I think it's in Matthew 16 where I don't know if you know the passage where Jesus is asking his own disciples, "Who do you say that I am?"
Mm-hmm.
And some say John the Baptist, but who do you guys say? Who am I according to you guys? And Peter chimes up and he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." And that's kind of how I feel I came to Christ, is that he was revealed to me by the Father when I wasn't looking. And I can only confess that Jesus is Lord by the Father. It's a gift. Faith is a gift. And I was given the gift when I was 25, and I've struggled with my own Christian faith. It's not been a perfect 25 years. But the older I get, the more I see why I need Jesus. It's not, it's never been I've been through a lot of real world situations where relying on Christ was just situations that were above and beyond my control, where I realized it was, I'm not the author of my life, and I'm not the one who sets the purpose, and and this trip up here to Kansas is very unique. This is kind of how God works sometimes. It doesn't make sense, and I don't know why, but he does these things, and I'm glad he does, and that's how I've road tested it 25 years, so I'm not going anywhere. It doesn't seem like I am. Try as I might sometimes. He's got his hand on me.
Cool. Why did everybody else, if you were brought up, why did you stay in it? I guess is my question.
I suppose I'll go next. My church that I've probably gone to all my life was non-denominational or Bible believing. This basically means literal belief in the word given to us, that word being the Bible, and nothing else. I am a very logic-based person in my thinking. I think, maybe not logic, but I think in black and whites and definites, which sometimes doesn't mix well when you're working with faith and you're trying to understand having faith in someone you can't see and you don't know if he's working in your life, and that is a weird mix. But to me, within the church and within the Bible and the way I was taught and the way I believe is correct, there was always an answer to my question. If I read the Bible, if I asked somebody who knew more than me, I could always find an answer, and an answer that made sense. Christianity always made sense to me, more than a lot of other things in the world. So, yeah.
Well, my family, we didn't really go to church like a ton when I was younger. My dad was in the Army, so we moved too often for us to really find a church home. And then I was kind of one of those kids that, like, when I went to visit my grandparents in San Antonio every summer, we went to VBS, and I was like, wow, this is great. It's Vacation Bible School for people who don't have that. And I was like, wow, this is great. I really enjoy this. But, like, there's never been a time in my life where I haven't believed in God. Like, it was always just something I was like, oh, yeah, totally. Why not? So that's been an interesting ride. And then when I was in the 7th grade, I started going to youth group with my sister, because my sister was going to youth group with her best friend, because her best friend was the pastor's daughter, and she was like, I'm not going to this place with all these strangers alone. Mally, you're coming with me. And Mally was like, ah, yes. And I got so excited about what they were doing in youth group that I was like, hey, Mom, can I go with them? And she's like, you think I'm going to say no to you going to church on Sunday nights? And so that's when that started. And we were, at that point, going to the non-denominational church. And there was a tiff between my father and the pastor on differences in opinions on running the church. And it was not handled well. And we were not so graciously asked to leave.
Oh, man.
Just an interesting experience. I mean, when I'm introducing myself, I'm like, hi, I'm Megan Rust. I'm a Taurus. I was kicked out of churches. Like, it's great. It's a great time. My deepest trauma is just get it all out there. And so I was like, hey, Mom, Dad, we should go to the Methodist church. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I want to go so bad. And that was the beginning of me being the Jesus friend, because I get so excited about religion. Like, I helped with Vacation Bible School every summer. I interned at my church after my freshman year of college, and then I just interned at Emmanuel United Methodist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, which was an interesting experience this past summer. And once I had to finally choose what I was going to be when I grew up, I was like, I've always loved mission work. So I was like, I'm going to go work for the Methodist Church and be a missionary. And it made so much sense to me. I'm finding now that it doesn't make sense to other people. And I'm like, yes, I can understand why this would be confusing. A lot of people say that I am too smart to just be wasting my time being a missionary, which is awful because I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, and I'm not great at math. So, like, what do you want me to do, be an engineer?
What does that mean?
Heck no, techno. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm a huge church nerd.
Do they think
I love Jesus so much.
Do they think missionaries are, like, stupid people? Is that what they were implying?
I think that they just think that I would be wasting my intellect doing that and not being, like,
an academic?
An academic, yeah. Just frustrating.
That's obnoxious.
Yeah.
Caroline.
Oh.
I guess you're next.
I've been called out.
Yeah, directly.
All right. Okay, let's see. From the beginning. I would definitely say, as far as, like, church for me at first was more of a status thing. Not so much for me as much as it was for my family, my extended family. Now, personally, my parents are divorced. My dad was Catholic. I never went to Catholic or like anything related to Catholics until I think I was 21, and that was on my own with a roommate. But I don't think I've ever seen my parents read the Bible, nor my siblings. However, I was really close to my grandparents and my aunts, and I've always kind of latched onto other people as far as family goes. So I grew up in the church because my family was really well known in the church, and that's the Presbyterian church. And then I went to summer camp, Christian summer camp called New Life Ranch. Went there from probably when I was 8 all the way till I was 18. I ended up actually working there as a ropes course counselor. From there, I went on to college, and I really kind of learned as far as why do I go to church. I will say I hate going to Sunday church, but I love Bible studies. Like, I'd rather go to like Wednesday church rather than Sunday church, because to me, Sunday, it's kind of like a quick teaching as far as like, here's what you need to know, you're in and you're out. But what intrigued me about the Bible was like, I don't know, just kind of Bible study itself and depth of it. I was also a fellowship Christian athlete, and I was president of some other Bible clubs and stuff like that. And I studied Jehovah's Witness for a year because I always heard mostly negative things toward Jehovah's Witness, which bothered me a lot, because usually the people who are saying that, they don't know anything in regards of Jehovah's Witness. So I decided, well, I want to learn. And there was also a cute girl, and I wanted to go with her, and she was like, hey, I'm going to start this. And I'm like, I'll go too. And I ended up just staying kind of the same with you. Like, I ended up staying, she ended up going. I also didn't know I liked girls, but that's beside the point. I know now. But I ended up studying Jehovah's Witness, and I kind of learned a lot from there. Is just how you can take yourself in maybe an uncomfortable situation to learn something new, and to learn that a lot of things are very similar. From there, I went to like Lutheran and Baptist, and I went to I think like a Baptist campsite, and then like I said, Catholic. So I also got like a Hebrew and Greek Bible, and I really just kind of like drove into the self-taught type of literature as far as, you know, kind of logical thinking. I'm a mathematical person, and I would read the Bible. I've read it like frontwards, backwards, and I would like pick out all these numbers, like the 40s and the 12s and the 10s and the 3s, and I would like tie it up to like different scriptures and like, what does this mean? And I kind of found out there's only like 2 pastors that I really enjoyed, and it didn't matter what denomination or who they were or what they were teaching, as much as it was how they like fit my own mind and how I logically thought. So to me, it's like, you can learn through perspective no matter where you go, but you don't have to automatically like deem it wrong. So I think for me, it's just like, I'm pretty easygoing, and I stayed within Christianity just for the fact like that's kind of what I know, but I'm super open-minded to learning more, because that has opened so many doors for me, and also just learning from other people, and, you know, not being as scared as some.
Yeah, so that brings me into it. Just another clarification question real quick. How in-depth has everyone studied the Bible here?
What's our, like, scale?
So have you read, just tell me how much have you read? How much have you studied of the Bible? Like cover to cover, how much of it in there?
I mean, gosh. I mean, I guess I've definitely have read it frontwards to backwards.
Cover to cover?
Not backwards, yeah. Cover to cover, probably 3 or 4 times. Growing up in the church, my aunt was part of that, like, vacation Bible school, and, like, we learned all the books. I knew it in Greek at one time. I don't anymore. But, I don't know, I'm pretty in-depth, and, like, we would do terminology, and, like, how old was Abraham and Sarah when they had Isaac? It would be, like, 99, 100, and how many people wrote the Bible. So, like, I would know a lot of trivia questions. So it's, again, why I really liked Bible study more than I did actual Sunday school. So I don't know. I'm awkwardly knowledgeable as far as facts. Yeah, that's what I got.
Dan, I assume you've read front cover to cover as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't know how many times I have. It's one of those things as you get older, I mean, the wonderful thing about it is you become familiar with it. The challenge of it is that you become so familiar with it, you have to learn it all over again and refamiliarize yourself with it. Because not growing up in the church, it was exciting because I didn't take it for granted as a lot of people did. But as I've gotten older, I take a lot of things for granted in terms of what the scriptures say. But my area of interest in scripture is, this last 2 years, especially since my apologetic degree, is who is Jesus, and how important is he, and especially the intersection, like Megan was talking about earlier, the intersection of Christ and the universe. That's really been where my passion has been. How does Jesus, who is Jesus, and what is he to us? Why do we need him? And how do the heavens proclaim the glory of God? What does that mean in Psalm 19? So the last couple of years through my apologetics degree, I've really been focused on Christ, his lordship, his divinity, his sonship, his two natures, fully divine, fully human, and how he pertains to a life, our culture today, and how to present him, what's the way to reach people with what Jesus has taught and what he has left us with in his word, and how does the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation speak of who Jesus is. One of my favorite passages is in Luke 24, where after Jesus has resurrected, he comes to the disciples on the Emmaus Road. Do you guys all know that story?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what's going on in their, they're walking to Emmaus, they're sad. Their teacher just died. We thought Jesus was going to be going to save Israel from Roman oppression. He was going to be the king. He was going to be our political Messiah, right? And they get this idea from Daniel that a kingdom will come and crush the other ones. But Jesus has to explain to them, "O foolish and slow of heart to believe. Do you not know that what has to, everything that has to be written has to be fulfilled?" And so Jesus, as he's walking to Emmaus, it's about a 7 to 10 mile journey, he's explaining to these disciples how he fits into Scripture from Genesis to Revelation, and it's fascinating. And so a lot of the universe, and there's some of my most favorite references about who Jesus is have to do with light. In John 8:12, he says he's the light of the world. In Revelation 22:16, John calls him the bright and morning star. In Numbers, the prophet Balaam says, "I see a star rising out of Jacob." And then in Matthew, the Magi see a star. They say his star, And in Malachi, he is called the Sun, S-U-N, of righteousness. And when he's being presented in the temple, I think it's Simeon who calls him the sunrise. And I just saw, I bought donuts this morning, and on my way up here, I got a donut, and I stopped at a donut shop. He was owned by a Korean gentleman who's a Christian. He had on his calendar 2 Corinthians 4:6. And I mentioned something to us about the light of Christ shining out of darkness, that God who said, "Let there be light," is the one who shines his light through us. And so my fascination, my pastime, my hobby has been cosmology and astronomy and the universe. And how do the heavens point to who Jesus is? So that's really, as I get older, I think that's the most important question any of us can ask. Who is Christ, and what do we say of, who do you say that Jesus is? Who is Jesus? I think there's no greater question that can be asked of us than to answer that question. So that's what I've been doing, and that's what I feel like the rest of my days will be, proclaiming him somehow to people that, are interested in the conversation.
Very cool. How in depth have you read it, Megan or Emma, whoever? Let's start first.
You can go first.
Okay. Well, I haven't read nearly as much as I think people think I have. Which, I guess I'm fronting my apologies to anybody who thinks that I've read the whole Bible. But I have been more recently getting into, there's this Bible study app called She Reads Truth. And for every single Bible study they have, it takes 10 minutes. And they have all of the Bible verses that they want to go with it, and then a woman kind of gives her testimony matching that, and then they have a comments section, which I've really found very valuable in growing my faith, because it's women experiencing, because they have He Reads Truth too, so it's mostly women experiencing the Bible and how it works in their life, which I thought has been really interesting. I've been getting more interested in like biblical history and like the historical context of things to understand why Jesus would say something like that. I've been discovering he's very sassy, which I very much enjoy about him. It's a nice character trait to have. I like to think that I'm like Jesus in that way. And then I've been listening to this podcast, and it's called Sunday School Dropouts. And it's really interesting because it is an atheist and a guy that was kind of raised Jewish, but not really, reading through the Bible, and they talk about it, and it's hilarious, and I am learning so much about the Bible.
That sounds interesting.
And like, oh, it's so funny. And like hearing the Bible through that perspective has been so interesting because they don't have this vested interest in making Jesus seem like the best guy ever, or God seem like perfect, which he is, but they are not so focused on like what us Christians kind of get hung up on sometimes. And so you really hear it in a real way and can experience it from another direction. And then this semester in my advanced leadership behaviors class, I had to write a paper about a great leader who was also a great follower, and I chose the Apostle Paul because he is my favorite person that's ever lived, besides Jesus himself. And so I had to read all of the epistles, and that was really interesting too, because those are my favorite part of the Bible.
Okay. What you, Emma?
I have a very kind of checkered. I have not read it cover to cover yet. I'm actually currently working on that right now because I was raised, or as I said before, I was raised in a church. Like, that church is my home, and it's full of my family, extended and metaphorical family, I guess. But, like, when you grow up in that setting, you can become lazy sometimes. And I'm pretty sure throughout my very long history of Bible studies and Sunday schools and services, I've read about 75% of the Bible, but it's very checkered and out of context understandings. So, me being out of college and me being an independent person, I'm trying to read it cover to cover to get the big picture of the Bible, because the Bible is a very big picture. And God is unchanging, and I'm looking at that through the perspective of chronology, maybe? Mm-hmm. That's a word, yeah. I'm very sorry. So I'm working on that now, and I'm in Deuteronomy, which, oh my gosh, Exodus through Deuteronomy and then on are very rough places.
It's a marathon.
Oh gosh. It's very, very rough, but I've learned a lot while doing this. And my dad's actually a deacon at our church, and he teaches the occasional lesson. But he's always, I'm so glad that my dad is in that position, because I can just text him and say, hey, Deuteronomy so-and-so and so-and-so says this. But I have a question about it. Can I run this by you? Can I play devil's advocate with you so I can understand this better? And, like, I don't know. I got a little off topic there, but it's just very interesting. And I love just learning more and taking it all in as one big piece instead of little tiny bits and pieces.
Yeah, it's a constant. It's constant.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been around it 25 years, and I still have to go back and say, "Oops, I got that wrong." Oh, and you read something, you've read it many times, and I just realized that I said Simeon, I meant Zacharias when I was talking earlier. But that's the kind of thing, you become familiar with it, and you become so familiar with it, you don't read it as much as you ought to. You think you've read it as many times as you've read it, but then you go back and you read something, and you're like, "Whoa, I didn't know that was in there." Oh, I've never. Or God speaks to you through it. You read it 100 times, and then you open it, and this is the only book that I've ever read that reads you. And so you have to. When I was in 1 year of seminary, one of my professors said the Bible was written to be reread and reread and reread. So like Megan said, you think, oh, you're so familiar and you're so knowledgeable about the Bible, but people forget, and I admit as a Christian that it's very, you want people to think that you know it, and you're like, no, I've made 2 or 3 mistakes on Dogma Debate, when David asks me a question about something, I'll get it wrong, and I go back and I'm like, oops, I missed that. So it's a constant learning. You know, when you stop learning, it's not good.
Mhm.
You know, that's when you dry up. But there's so much you can go back and you can relearn, and you can be excited about Deuteronomy again. You can be
Yeah.
excited about Exodus. I love the going back and refamiliarizing myself with these passages. It's
Mhm.
really I need to, you know, you guys are reminding me. That's probably a season where I need to start doing that again. You know, I've been studying it so formally, and now I got to go back and be more devotionally oriented toward it. But
And
that-
enjoy it again.
and enjoy it again.
Yeah.
You know, it's and once you're in school, you do it formally, and then you have to get out and enjoy it again. And I'm trying to rekindle that enjoyment in the things that I'm doing right now. So this is good. It's very good.
Jaron, or Stephanie, whoever, I don't know, what's the Jehovah Witness kind of concept of the Bible? Isn't it like very different?
I think like it is very Bible based. Like they're all like, I personally haven't read it cover to cover, but I know like if you go to meetings and stuff, like they use it a lot. So like I know a lot about it. Like it's kind of like how she said, it's like checkered, and like I wouldn't say I've read it like front to cover in like that order, but I know a lot about it, or at least I did at one point in time.
Yeah.
But I think that they use it a lot for like certain situations, or like they'll turn to like a certain scripture and they'll read it there, and they're more of like like they don't think it's like Stephanie, maybe you can help me on this, but like they interpret it a lot, like it's not necessarily
Literal.
like literal. They're very like interpretive of it.
I took it as literal when I studied. Like, the only thing that comes to mind when I think of like Jehovah's Witness in like a literal sense was when they were going by the lunar calendar and like taking communion. But as they were passing around, I remember the friend that I went originally for, she like elbowed me. She's like, "Don't drink it." I'm like, "Why not?" Everybody else does it, and she's like, "No, you can't. You shouldn't do that." And I remember I was like, "Man, this is kind of a weird timing. Are they doing this right?" And you know, that was kind of like that one little sense where they're like, "Yeah, you can't." Now that says you can't, and like they have proof, so to speak. They have, you know, they're definitely somebody like you can ask any question, they got it.
Yeah.
They got a pamphlet, they got a tab here.
Oh boy,
Like
they
they can answer your questions, very informatively. But I took it as like they're very literal. And then also, you know, you guys don't celebrate holidays, birthdays, Christmas, all that stuff because of pagan, and again they have very legitimate reasons for that. But that was my experience as far as like don't drink communion, and they have a reason for that as far as like who's the number of chosen, and stuff like that. So that's my literal take on that when I experienced Jehovah's Witness as far as like a year and a half.
So I'm hearing that they do predestination. Is that a thing? Or
No.
Okay.
I would like to state that before, that's like Jehovah's Witness is kind of like the only thing I've ever known, because I know previously before coming to college I was like, no, my family's not that religious, and then I quickly realized that we are up there when it comes to how religious we are. So just keep that in mind, everyone.
They can be an interesting group to talk to. I remember one group that met outside my library, and I just struck up a conversation with them, and they're very interesting.
My beautiful angelic mother, whom I love dearly, is too nice, and she invited lovely Jehovah's Witness women into our home for a Bible study at 8 in the morning on Saturdays and made me go.
Yay.
So I got very close with the Jehovah's Witness.
You get a watchtower?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were lovely. They were lovely
Relate with it,
women.
too.
And then I think we got on their list because then they came knocking more.
Oh,
And then I
no.
dated a Mormon and they started knocking, and it was it was a whole thing. I'm not equating them. I just know they both do the door-to-door evangelism.
Oh, yeah, they do. You can always tell what the Mormons look like, though, because it's the white shirts and the bow ties, and they're all like teenage guys.
Yours have bow ties? I'm
My-
used to skinny ties.
Ours had skinny ties.
Same.
No,
But
no,
I
it
can-
was
You're
skinny
thinking of
ties.
And
are you thinking
backpacks.
of Mormon missionaries?
Yeah,
The
well,
bicycle missionaries?
Yeah,
Yeah.
back in Firestone, Colorado, we have a very huge Mormon population.
Yeah.
Like a good quarter of our school was Mormon. Yeah.
They populate quickly.
They really do. No, like, I kid you not. One of my friends had a family of 11 kids.
I think they kid you a lot, actually. That's the thing. I'm
Oh
so
my
sorry.
gosh.
No, Leavenworth has a lot of Mormons, too, and since I dated one, I learned a lot about it.
Oh boy.
It's so interesting. It's such a journey.
Go ahead,
What are you
Steph. What
gonna
were you going to say?
Poor Stephanie. That's fine. I like hearing about it. Well, with my experience, I see Jehovah's Witnesses as like they study it very, very literally. Sometimes a little more literally than I liked to really. Hope. Sorry.
Who's a popular
Really?
one getting a call?
Jehovah's Witness. That was my mom.
Oh,
Your ears were burning.
she knows.
No, yeah, like with the whole thing about, like you said, with the communion, I mean, not the communion, the,
Yeah, Passover stuff.
Yeah, Passover.
yeah, with the whole not, like,
Uh-huh.
drinking it just because of the, 1,044?
Yep. I know.
Yeah.
144
Yeah.
times.
144
Yeah.
predestined,
Uh-huh.
people. That's the only predestined
That has
thing.
become
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but that's become an issue for the church in the last couple of decades, because the original chosen have some of them were getting in their octogenarian 80s and 90s, and they were dying, and they were having a hard time.
Yes.
You know, how do you when your denomination gets larger, how do you incorporate people who aren't going to be chosen? Which is it's difficult. I mean, a lot of these denominations are difficult. I engaged very briefly. They were on the street in San Francisco. This is a couple of years ago when I was still living in California, and got into it. I had asked one of the street people with the tract, I said, what do you guys teach about Jesus? And I didn't know this. I don't have much knowledge in the denomination, but it surprised me. They shared with me that they do not believe that Jesus was the Son of God or that Jesus was divine.
Oh, well, they do believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but they
But not the
believe
Trinity.
that God
Jesus and
himself
Holy Spirit,
is
yeah.
Jehovah, and that Jesus is literally the Son of God. So two separate entities.
Okay.
As many people believe that it's just one entity. Or I know, like, Catholics believe, the Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and
God, yeah.
The
Yeah,
Trinity.
The Trinity.
The
God,
Trinity.
Christians
Yeah.
too.
the Father, Son, and
Yeah.
Holy Spirit.
yeah.
And so that's what it was. Jesus, it's just one. He's just one person. That's it. There's no Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
There's no.
yeah,
There's no Trinity.
they do still believe that he will be the king. So like they kind of divide the kingship between Jehovah and then Jesus, and they have a certain timeline. Like
With like
I know,
trade-off.
yeah, I
Do they have
went
like
to
different names, like Yahweh and
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So they just think that the actual literal name of God is Jehovah or
Mhm,
Yahweh.
mhm, mhm.
Just different names, different languages.
So wait, you guys never had to go through the awkward popsicle, hot chocolate, and Kool-Aid example?
No.
Where it's like,
What?
What?
I've never done that anywhere.
so at Sunday school, they were trying to explain the Trinity because it is
Oh,
the
man.
most confusing thing for a child to conceptualize, also an adult. And they were like, okay, so this is a popsicle. And we just didn't have a lot of money or resources at hand, and so we just picked up what we had, which we could have just used water, but it's fine. This is a popsicle. It is frozen. This is hot water that is steaming. It is steam. And this is just regular water. It's all water, but they're in different forms.
Oh man.
Ta-da! Trinity!
They always
Why didn't they
gave
just
us
use ice instead of a frozen popsicle stick?
I don't know.
Children love pop.
they always use eggs with us when they gave us that example. It was the shell, the yolk, and the white.
I
They're
have
not
a-
yoking around.
I have a good Trinity example
Crack me
from
up.
cosmology.
Okay.
This was before. Sorry, I keep bringing this up. Stuff before your time, but
That's fine.
in 1987 there was a first supernova. They observed this supernova. Astronomers did, and it's called SN for supernova 1987A. And this was before we had the Hubble Space Telescope. This is before we had the Chandra X-ray Telescope, and this is before we had a lot of the other telescopes. So they saw this fuzzy explosion in the sky, but they didn't have a clear resolution on it like they wanted to. And Hubble didn't launch until 1990, so we had this very fuzzy view of this supernova. We knew it was a supernova, but it was a blue star. If you know anything about cosmology and stars, that blue stars aren't supposed to blow up. So before 1987, blue stars are young stars. They're not supposed to go supernova. It's these giant super red stars that are supposed to do this. Anyway, so this blue star dies and goes supernova. And so once we got the telescopes up, by the early 2000s, and you can look these up. They're fantastic colors, images. There's an X-ray version. The Chandra X-ray telescope takes pictures of light in X-ray wavelengths. And so they shot a picture of the supernova, beautiful neon blue ring. And Hubble took a picture of it in visible, not invisible light, but took a picture of it in visible light you can see. And that was a beautiful mosaic. And then the ALMA, this is a telescope array in northern Chile, took a picture of it. And it was a beautiful, sort of like an orange cloud. And that was all the same supernova in different wavelengths of light. And, kind of like the water constituency. But that's those were all colors, except with the exception of the Hubble. Some of those colors were invisible to the naked eye, but it was all one event. And so it's any analogy breaks down. How can you have 3 in 1? It's hard, but I thought that was neat. That's just my cosmology speaking. I'm sorry. Science and Christianity. Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah, to answer your question, Carson, yeah, they study it pretty
Yep.
in depth.
Thank you for that. Okay, Emma mentioned this a little bit about herself. Who all in here is a black and white thinker, other than Emma? We know Emma is. Or likes to consider yourself a black and white thinker. Right, wrong, yes, no, black, white. Don't live in the gray. Anyone?
Oh my.
No one? Megan?
No.
Caroline? Dan?
I think there's some things I'm probably black and white on because I'm older. You tend to get out of the gray area when you get a little older, I think. But I'm still, I may mature still. I'm still maturing. So there are things that I find that there's a lot of things I say as I get older. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. So sometimes the black and white is a result of maybe more life experience or sometimes lack of life experience. But I'm black and white on some things. I think certain ethical decisions that I've made and failed over the course of my life, trial and error, and I'm not going to do that again. I'm definitely black and white about this, that, and the other thing. But there are other things where I'm much more interdisciplinary, I guess, trying to consider different sides to different issues. You think you have Jesus figured out, and you put him in a box, and then he takes you through a situation where you're like, Lord, what is this supposed to mean? It's like Job. You guys know the book of Job.
Oh.
Well, that was my second
boy.
second episode with David. We didn't talk much about it, but Job is a wise, mature believer who has family and possessions and a reputation, and God allows that to be taken from him, and God never gives him an explanation, except for, he does give him an explanation, but it's one long extended question and answer about creation. Where were you when I created the universe? Where were you when I created the stars? Where were you? Tell me where the lightning is. Where's the storehouse of snow? How do you feed the mountain goats?
The
Tell
most
me if you
savage response in the Bible.
Yeah, it's the longest.
We can talk about Job.
Sure. It's the longest response of God in the scriptures is the last few chapters of Job. It's the longest discourse that God is speaking uninterruptedly throughout the Bible is the last few chapters of Job. Mm-hmm.
So I've done this before, and I had some psychology majors and a psychology professor come in here, and I messed with them a little bit. So I'm gonna not do the same thing, but I'm gonna do kind of the same concept. So I'm just gonna ask questions to kind of understand where everybody thinks and where everybody is in terms of the Bible.
Are you gonna tell us at the end what we are?
No, I just want to know.
I just want it to be like one of those.
You are
Is it like a
the
BuzzFeed
red
quiz?
spirit,
Spirit
black
animal.
spirit,
Thank
and yellow.
you.
No,
Be a
that's
giraffe.
not at all. Not at all.
It's
Just
like
just to know
Is
where
this going to
everybody-
determine
Follow.
which stock photo we are?
Yep.
Good.
Oh.
I want to be the one that's
Sure.
really enjoying eating salad.
By the way, Megan,
Yes,
do you know anything about astrology?
I do.
Do you know that
Please continue.
you might not be a Taurus?
Oh, is this a new thing?
No.
Okay, because they changed it and they're like, well, the
So-
moon was in a different place, and I'm like, stop.
Yes. So listen, when those things, when the horoscope, fun fact, when the horoscopes were basically planned out or set down, whatever. The zodiacs the constellations were in a different place back then than they are right now. So when you were born, you're probably, I don't know what comes before or after Taurus, but you're one of those.
Well, consider when I was looking up, the meme, my Guy Fieri quote was, "We're going to Flavortown," and I cannot let that change.
That's fine.
I need you to know that.
But I just want you to know.
Denial's not just a river in Egypt, it's right here.
I'm actually not a Cancer. Turns out I'm a Gemini, and it was very shocking, and my mother no longer knows who I am. But it's okay. Anyway, okay. So I'm gonna start on my side this time. Stephanie, do you want in on this? I mean, I guess anybody who's like, I know, Darren, you don't really like read the Bible or anything. You're a pretty neutral guy.
Not anymore.
Yeah, okay. No. You can still answer, and Stephanie, you can still answer if you guys want to. So the first kind of this or that question is, does the Bible say that the earth is young or old? Do you want to answer that? Stephanie is taking a pass. We'll start with Megan. Take your time.
Well, I think that it says it's
we can do two different things here.
Okay.
I can ask you what does the Bible say, or what do you think the Bible says, and I can ask you what you think, because those could be two different answers. I understand.
Okay.
So we'll start with the Bible.
I don't know. It doesn't really. I think it probably says that it's young.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It's like it's not old compared to God, but it's old compared to us.
Okay.
Especially me.
Is that an age joke?
No, God was just there forever, and the earth was not there forever. Okay. So comparatively, it is young.
So, in 6 days, are we talking? Or are we talking like millions of years developing?
Well,
yeah, according to the Bible. Well, and then we'll go to your opinion.
I have no. It's so vague, which is something that I really actually enjoy about that part.
Okay.
Talking about the creation of the world, because I am a full believer in evolution.
Okay.
I'm like, yes,
older.
It totally makes sense, because the thing is, it's like it's not really specific. Like, it was 24 hours. It's like, what's a day to God? Like, are we really gonna assign God 24 hours for a day? Like, so I think it's completely possible that there was millions of years in between that it was light and then it was dark situation. I think we just ascribed something to it.
Emma, you look like you really have something.
Go ahead, Emma.
Something to say.
No,
We can do. I mean, if it's the same answer for both, that's fine. You can.
It's definitely not the same answer.
Okay. Go ahead with the Bible first.
Like, oh gosh. Like, there was this sermon that I went to that was talking about this. I think it was a guest speaker, Notes from Genesis, I think they're called, but I could be wrong. I'm terrible with names. But, like, the Bible uses the word day hundreds and hundreds of times throughout the Bible. So I think we can't ignore the fact that if God describes a day in another part of the Bible, he is describing a day in this part of the Bible. So I think it is fully truthful that when God says he created the world in 6 days and on the seventh day he rested, that is entirely true.
Like, as in 24 hours day?
Yeah.
Okay, so is that young earth for the Bible or young earth for you? Okay, and then for you?
Yeah.
She takes the Bible literally, so I think
it's the same.
Her answers are going to be the same, I think.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Different from
no,
me.
I meant for you. I meant you.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
you.
So her two answers are the same, but they're different than mine.
Okay. Cool. Jaren, you can answer if you want to, but you don't have to.
I will choose to answer this one. So the Bible does say 6 days, but then there's also, I'm pretty sure, a part where it talks about how, like, the time length for God is different for us. So I'm gonna assume I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry. I'm bad. Maybe one of these smart people can know. But it does, I believe, mention that. So that's where I would then equate that to the 6
Our exceptional
days.
guest who has done the seminary thing is making a seminary search face.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
I'm listening.
I'm gonna say the Bible technically says 6 days, but then it talks about like the time thing. So I'm gonna say it's old in both.
I mean,
old. Okay.
Yeah.
We can talk about it in a minute. Just relax. We'll talk about it. Okay.
And that's
Caroline.
my final answer.
Okay.
Caroline, fire away.
I think this is an interesting topic. In fact, we spoke about this in our apartment.
Yeah, we did.
I totally disagree that a day is 24 hours. 1,000%.
In the Bible?
Yes.
Or in general? Okay.
No. Just in the Bible.
College
and
time.
I also can't reference
Honestly.
you like as far as the scripture that will tell that, but as far as like if you're going to study like Greeks and Hebrews and just timelines and just in general, definitely has been recorded that even our today 24 hours, like the sun has like risen or not risen, like days used to be longer. Like that's already been proven scientifically that days used to be longer. So to me, it would only make sense that 900 BC would be way longer than 24 hours already, if only 1800 was already longer. So I definitely believe that when God says, I made, heaven and the earth, and then I made water, and then humans, like, I definitely don't think it was one day. Stephanie and I had kind of gone on a little tangent about dinosaurs, like, we're in that, I know, like, we're in that timeline, like, were there dinosaurs and then humans, He made animals first before he made humans, and where does that lay? And I just really don't think a day was 24 hours, because then the atmosphere was also way different compared to what it was before the flood, and that also changed your timeline and what time was, and like how long humans even existed, due to not having that like ultraviolet rays. That's not the word I'm looking for. Anyways, it wasn't as harmful, but other things killed them. So I would say Earth of itself is pretty new compared to the universe. It depends definitely what you compare it to. I think Earth is roughly new, but I don't think a day in biblical times is 24 hours.
What do you mean by relatively new? Do you mean like thousands of years? Billions? Millions? Where are you?
Well, it just depends. Well, I don't think I can compare the Earth to anything that's younger than it. Like
How old do you think the Earth is?
I don't remember. I just know it's old.
What do you mean you don't
Billions.
remember?
Okay, billions.
Billions?
How about that? Yeah. To give you an answer,
According
I'd say
to
billions.
you or
Some sort of science somewhere.
science somewhere?
Like it's older than 1,000.
Do you think the Bible says is?
That's good because we're in 2017.
Is compliant to that? I would say if you do your research as far as what does a timeline mean, and that, yes, you'd have to do some digging, I guess, and kind of interpret the information and like add some sort of different mathematical reasons to it as far as what this timeline is compared to our timeline, just like how you would currency. Like our currency does not match up with what currency was 200 years ago or whatever that is. So I think if you measure your time differently compared to what it is now, you could find the answer, but I would say the Earth is new compared to most of the universe. Yeah, that's what I'm going for.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to say.
So, old Earth, Bible says old Earth. Okay, Dan, your turn.
I'm so excited for this. He actually knows what he's talking about.
He's going to say,
Okay.
we're all wrong.
No, it's a
We're all
huge.
right.
It's a huge question, and I think the way in which we're going about it says something about the culture in which we live. I've been in this debate many times and have had many conversations. My podcast right now, my friend Wayne and I, we talk about the universe in our podcast. Wayne is where Emma is on the continuum of literal 6-day. But what I've been listening to, and what I think we're struggling with just as a culture, is looking at our world through the lens of scientific rationality. Our culture the religion of our culture is science, scientism. It's embraced that if knowledge is not empirical, not scientifically deduced, not peer-reviewed, doesn't pass through a laboratory, that somehow it's suspect, that the logic and rationality of mathematics, there's nothing wrong with science, I'm not putting science down, but it is the dominant language of our era, science and technology. So that's the lens that we have to recognize. Okay, I've got we live in a scientific, technological culture. I've got to take those glasses off, and I've got to look at this the way it was written, when it was written, and why it was written. So it doesn't have 21st century science on it. So the question we're even asking about the day age, really has everything to do with the kind of scientific knowledge that has unfolded over the last several hundred years, the last century, especially since Darwin. I don't really think there was so much of an issue about science and Christianity until Darwin. And then, do you guys know who Charles Lyell is? Lyell, I think it's Lyell or Lyell. He was a geologist that was Darwin's sort of right-hand man who made natural selection geologically uniform. So you guys know the strata in rocks, and that the bottom layer is old and the top layer is... That's been the foundational paradigm for how natural selection has been verified. So the fossil in this layer means it's this old. The fossil up here, it means it's this old. But that was Charles Lyell. I think it's Lyell. I'm probably killing the name. Lyell or Lyell? I always get it mixed
I'll
up.
do a Google.
Yeah, if you would, somebody. It's Lyell or Lyell. Charles Darwin, Charles Lyell. I think it's Lyell. Anyway, they sat down and they created a paradigm of rock layers so that the fossils could be identified with a certain age and say, hey, Charles, how old's this snail? It's 20 million years. So it takes 20 million years for a snail to develop. Okay, great. But instead of looking at the rocks, they didn't have the knowledge that we have today. They were kind of making it up as they went. And so instead of what you hear traditionally is that this rock layer took 20 million years, this rock layer took 20 million years, rather than looking at them as layered time, look at them as layered events. So that's one way that we can look at, what did you get?
Lyell.
Lyell, that's right. So in Darwin's time, in the late mid-19th century, you have two gentlemen basically creating a scientific paradigm of interpreting the natural world. And so ever since then, the dominant... And Darwin was fond of Lyell because Lyell got Moses out of the science. This is an exchange that the two men had, that he was trying to take science out of Genesis. Let's just look at the rocks for the rocks' sake. So the scientific inquiry and the conflict really began, I think, for all culture in the 1850s. But to your question, Carson, what's going on in Genesis? You have to look at this in terms of, remember what I said in Luke about Jesus on the road to Emmaus. He begins with Moses and the prophets and explains to them everything that pertains to who he is. And so when you're looking at God's actions in Scripture, however they're described to us, we have to look at them, and at least this is how I do it, you look at them as Jesus doing this. And so what we have in Genesis is Jesus. If we were on the Emmaus Road, what we probably would have heard is that I did this. I did this. And it gives me chills to say that. I did this, guys. You're walking along the Emmaus Road with the creator of the universe. I was the only one there when I made the heavens and the earth. And why I think this is literal is because Jesus took on humanity as God, and he did things in his human person to give us an example. Now, how I back that up is if you go to Exodus chapter 31, where God is talking to Moses, and you're talking about the Sabbath. You guys know what the Sabbath is? Yeah. What's the Sabbath? What's the deal about the Sabbath? What was important about that? Anybody know?
It was a holy day of rest devoted to...
Resting. Why do we... Resting from what?
Work.
Okay, so this is what God says. Now, when God is talking to Moses, who I always used to think when I was a brand new Christian, what is this, like a silvery cloud with light just shining down and a voice going, Moses, Moses, Moses. Who's he talking to? Tapioca pudding in the sky? What is this form that...
Please.
But Exodus says that God spoke to Moses as a man speaks to his friend face to face. So what you have in the Old Testament are pre-incarnate revelations of Christ. God, this is Jesus talking to Moses. Moses is talking to a man. And so when God is talking to Moses, the Sabbath, it is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, but on the seventh day he ceased from labor and was refreshed. And so the very act of creation, and this is how I look at it, was an act of suffering, it was an act of love, and it was the same kind of labor that we do. Yes, it was supernatural, but he did it. Did he have to do it in 6 days? No. Did he need 1,000,000 years? No. He turned water into wine like that. And what's in wine? You got carbon, you got sulfites, you got all that kind of stuff, you got tannins. Bang! Let there be tannins, let there be carbon, let there be sulfites, let there be he all at once.
And he saw that it was good.
And it was very good. Right. So I would argue that in order to interpret Genesis, we have to look at it in terms of who Jesus Christ was. He's the Lord and maker of the heavens and the earth, and he functioned and built the world we inhabit in the same amount of time that we would work on a regular 6 day. In other words, Jesus is intimately identifying with us on a level that we can understand. He did that in 6 days for us as a model. And so it's not, now ultimately, does it matter if he stretched it out over millions of years? I think it does, because we can't conceive of that time frame, right? It's not pertinent to our human experience. And God creates the universe in such a way that it's very anthropocentric, and that God became a man. That's the dignity. That's the love. That's what he did for us. And I think in Genesis, the act of the 6 day creation is very much in keeping with who we are as human beings, because that's what we do, and that's what he entered into, and that's why I think it's important that is a day, and that I don't think anybody hearing Exodus 31, Moses especially, would have thought there were eons of time. Oh God, you just did that over eons of time. Now I think, Caroline, you'd mentioned the passage about days not being the same. It's in 2 Peter 3:8. One day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. Some people have taken that and said, well, see, Genesis could be whatever. But I think, no, you have to look at who Jesus is. Now, I'm not saying that time certainly just flies by with God. He's the Ancient of Days. What's time? There was no time. He created time. But I think in Genesis, God is intimately identifying with us. Because you guys know when Moses died, who buried him?
Wasn't it?
God himself. God himself buried Moses. Nobody knows where Moses' grave is to this day. God himself buried Moses. So he is very much intimately involved in our lives in such a way that the act of creation itself, because when he was creating, what do you think was going through his mind? What do you think he knew? He was creating a stage upon which he would die, upon which he would suffer. And it was an act of love. I mean, it's when you're married to somebody, when you become a parent, this is an act of love, and it's an act of suffering. You're going to have trouble. And when he built this whole universe, he knew what was going to happen. And so I think he did it in a time frame that was very human. So he could turn around and say to us, guys, I know what it's like to work all week. I know what it's like to rest. Do exactly as I have done.
Perfect timing during finals.
I
do have a question for you.
Absolutely. That's what I think.
What?
Young.
Thank you.
Answer.
And the short answer.
I could have just said that.
I can't think of
thank you so much for
terminology.
sharing.
Like, I know there's King James, but what Bible are you reading?
The New American Standard. And let me tell you why I read it. There's two ways you can read a translation. You can read a translation like the English will literally try to take words and match them to the Hebrew. Okay, so you run into, like Job. You guys know the term. There's two terms in Job: Leviathan and Behemoth. Okay, you've heard of those terms. Most Bibles will leave those terms in there. Those are English pronunciations of the actual Hebrew word. So they left the Hebrew in there and they Englishatized, they Anglicanized, or what, I don't even know what the word is. They've made it into an English word, but it's the Hebrew, because we don't know what it is. We don't know what Job is talking about. Now, some versions will have a little note that says crocodile. Like, no, that's not a crocodile. Hippopotamus, no. Hippopotamus's tails they're not very big. So the NASB is one of those attempts to literally go from the Hebrew and literally put the best English equivalent word on there. Now, that's a literal translation, what they call a literal. You can kind of get the translations that have more of the essence of what's trying to be said. So you're not so concerned with word-for-word translation as you are trying to capture what's being said there.
Right.
So and some versions are kind of in between. But I like the NSB because it's most, after I studied Hebrew and Greek, it was the closest English text literally to the originals. Yeah.
Because the only reason why I asked that, because, I mean, you make a very good point as far as Jesus tried to humanize himself so that we as humans would understand what he says. But I can't help but think, like, the Bible that we read today, like, how accurate is it? And how...
That's a good question.
And how many... And that kind of bothers me sometimes, too, is whenever you study Bible, because for me, like, I don't really know if this is really as close as it possibly can be, because it's kind of like telephone game. Because I know whenever I was studying Hebrew a little bit, not as extensive as you at all, somebody kind of described to me, right now when we say avenue, we put AVE. But we understand what that is, so we would abbreviate. And a lot of Hebrew things are abbreviated, and there's a lot of things in there that we even added to the Bible that is now the standard. And like what I automatically think of is like homosexuality and stuff like that, and how new terminologies are introduced for what we are experiencing in the time that we are living. So I do wonder, how accurate is the Bible that we read today? Is it just for our own convenience? Is there stuff in there that aren't in there, that are extra that is in there? And that's, I mean, there's no way to tell at all. But I definitely don't think every single Bible that we have access to is the most accurate we could possibly get, just because people are flawed. You interpret it how many different ways that you could possibly be. I think some people think they're more right than others. So that's why, like, I like to look in between the lines, because I think that's the only accurate place that you can do, is not take it too literal, but to look at it like, what if, not that this is a mistake, but what is it reading more into? But that's the only reason why I asked, because that's, for some questions, I think, what if we just kind of interpret that for our own convenience?
I think, for me, the confidence that I have in the scriptures is that there are so many Old and New Testament manuscripts, and there's variation among them. I mean, even the secular scholar, biblical New Testament historian Bart Ehrman says that there are over 100, I don't know exactly what the number are, but in the New Testament manuscripts, just in the New Testament, there are several thousand, I don't know what the number is, multiple thousands of discrepancies, where one word might be changed, or there's a letter missing or something like that. And 95% of those discrepancies are relatively unimportant. There's some big ones, but the point of the manuscript abundance of the Old and New Testament gives us, we can compare this one to this one, we can compare this one to this one. We have multiple copies of Old Testament manuscripts, unlike any other manuscript in antiquity. So there's like 5,000 or 6,000 manuscripts. And what I mean by a manuscript, anything from a shard of paper, as big as a credit card, to full copies of the New Testament. And so when you have that many manuscripts, there's no other document of antiquity that comes even close to the number of manuscripts, copies of manuscripts. Now, we don't have the originals, that's true. But when you have so much volume to compare, you can see, okay, John 1 says it here, this manuscript says John 1 here, and there's almost nearly unanimous agreement on on a majority of what you're reading there. But of course, the conundrum is we don't have the originals. But there's like Homer, Pliny, Tacitus, Plato, Plato's dialogues. Most of these copies of these ancient manuscripts were written hundreds, if not thousands, of years after the originals have taken place. And so with the originals in the scriptures, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were believed to have been written before, all of them before 90 A.D., and then the Apostle Paul's epistles were written in the 50s and 60s. And so these are things that are written like 10, 20, 30 years after the events. And there's no other manuscripts that we have from history that are even that close from the time they were written and the actual events about which they were writing. So there's a lot of reason that there's a lot of, so in other words, what I'm saying is that if we question the accuracy based on historical manuscript evidence, we really have to throw out the rest of the things that we kind of take for granted historically. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. The translations, the concerns, they're genuine and they're real. And how do we know? And so that was my bug. How do I know? And so you go in and you study that. How can we know? What do you know? It's a lifetime. And I'm not done learning.
It's intriguing.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But that was just all of my question. I just wanted to hear your
sorry,
thoughts.
did I answer? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you totally did.
Okay, what's the next one? I'm nervous and
Okay.
excited.
Well, first of all, has anyone's minds been changed yet?
No.
I think I would need a hot second to
I know.
consider and
Who
deliberate.
thinks the old is Earth? The old is Earth?
Yes?
Earth is old?
I can give you a scientific
Okay.
reason for a young universe.
Go ahead.
Well, at least one that's not in accordance with Big Bang cosmology.
Sure.
Big Bang cosmology assumes the universe is 14.7 billion or 13.7 to 14 billion years. The Earth generally gets tagged with 4.5 billion years in terms of cosmic development. Wayne and I, my friend, we just did a podcast a couple of weeks ago called The Biggest Things in the Universe, or Things Too Big for the Big Bang. So basically, or I'll just give you a real primer. I don't want to bore you to death, but basically the theory is the farther away something is, the older it is, right? So the universe was a hot, dense subatomic photon of some kind, and it expanded rapidly, and over the course of 14 billion years, this expansion just slowly. So my left hand and my right hand should be the oldest things in the universe, okay? And that means we're looking back at a very ancient universe. And when something is slowly developing in an ancient universe, when you're looking back at the beginning of time, you should not find much, right? Things should be pretty uniform. Galaxies should be simple. There's no expectation that we should find structures out where the early universe was. So do you all understand the concept? The farther back we look, the earlier the universe is. We're looking back in time almost to the beginning if we could. Theoretically, that's modern cosmology. We're actually looking back. When you look up at a star, you're looking at light that started its journey several million years ago, according to current Big Bang theory and the way light travels. So what astronomers have found since the 90s, since you guys were born, what has just blown the cosmology theories out the window, is they have found superstructures of galaxies. So just think of massive strings of Christmas lights. So these aren't just galaxies. So this is like going into a nursery in a hospital where there's 6 and 7 pound, 8 pound, 9 pound newbies in their little cribs, and you go in there, but you don't expect to go in there and find a 600-pound sumo wrestler who's 3 months old, or that would blow your mind. The baby is, here's a 9-day-old baby and he's 300 pounds. My goodness, what's he doing? How could you have a 900-pound 3-day-old baby?
C-section.
Yeah, that would
something like that.
So this is kind of the shock that hit cosmology 20, 30 years ago. They're finding they weren't expecting to find a whole lot, and they're finding galaxies that are billions of light years in length, and they shouldn't be. Then their astronomers are like, there's not enough time in our theory to explain how those things got there to be that big in that early part of the universe. They should not be there. There's not enough time for these things to have developed, but they're there. And it's just one of those things that it makes the most sense if they were created on, with the rest of the universe as it was, in situ, as it is, rather than the assumption of the cosmos is that it gradually has developed. That's the assumption, right? That there's no creation narrative in modern cosmology. It's just an assumption that it just gradually developed over time without God's intervention. But the naturalistic gradual explanations of the universe are falling apart. There's just Band-Aids and duct tape and bubble gum and glue, and it's just a lot of ad hoc argumentation about naturalistic explanations as to how the universe got to be where it is. But if you look at it from a creation perspective, it makes a lot more sense that these things were created, bang, as they are. Anyway.
What about now? Any of you guys' mind changed?
I have failed in my
still
mission.
consider that to be rather young.
I
If it
didn't
makes
need
you
to change my mind, so.
If it makes you feel any better, it's finals, and I don't think our cognitive function is at a level that is acceptable in most other times.
But please don't feel like I'm not like trying to shut down your argument.
Oh, no.
I do
Ask
have a
me
question.
questions.
No.
Ask me questions, and if I don't know, I don't know. I don't mean to be, like I know everything. I don't.
Yeah. Go.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jerry, go. You're the guest.
So I know me and Carson. I had a presentation on the Big Bang a couple weeks ago, and we
Oh,
talked
cool.
to our professor on it.
Neat.
And I know we asked him about that. And during the Big Bang, there's I think it was called hyperinflation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
That's
and
one
it's
of the
where
theories.
it
Rapid
happened,
expansion,
rapid
yeah.
expansion. It was
Mhm.
quicker than the speed of light. Would
10
that
to the negative 43 seconds.
is
Planck
like a
time.
Planck time. You're right.
Yes.
Planck time. But would that theory necessarily give it a head start if
Okay.
it's going faster
So
than the speed of light?
so
Is that my
Planck time
question?
and inflationary theory was created by a man named Alan Guth, and what Alan was trying to do. So what you have in the universe is what they call the cosmic microwave background radiation. All right? And basically what that is the wallpaper of the universe. All right? So picture a big room, and it's got all the same wallpaper on every side of it. Okay? and instead of wallpaper, it's light. They're photons, and they're a certain temperature. And what blew cosmologists away in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, was this temperature of this light is the same on every wall, is as far as we can look. Now, that shouldn't be the case. Why? Why should the light on that wall be the same temperature as the light on that wall? Because you guys know that light travels in a wave and like a particle. So how can that wall and that wall be the same? They should be double in size, or double the age of the light. So in other words, if this light has been expanding, this light should be older than it is. But because of the temperature, it's wrong. I mean, it just doesn't fit the data. So what Alan Guth did was explain, well, if this stuff was close together and then expanded really quickly, that might explain why the temperature is the same. But that was, and Alan admits that that was a sort of what they call an ad hoc. It just tried to explain one aspect of the universe. But the problem with the superinflationary theory is that you have things, well, you know what quarks are?
Yep.
Okay, so quarks are required. There's 2 up quarks and a down quark that makes a proton, and 2 down quarks and an up quark make a neutron.
What's a quark?
A quark is a subatomic particle that forms protons and neutrons. So they're like, so think of Lego blocks.
Yeah.
It's like molecules that make up Lego blocks. So protons and neutrons are like Lego blocks that fit together, and then the quarks would be the plastic stuff that makes up the Legos. So protons and neutrons are Lego that go together, 2 Lego pieces that go together, and then quarks are the little plastic material that would actually make up the Legos. So the problem I see, the problem with superinflation, you only have like a window of a minute for all these quarks to form protons and neutrons, which form ultimately hydrogen and helium. So what you have to have happen in this rapid expansion, if Alan Guth is going to take the universe out that big, that quickly, you're not giving quarks and you're not giving protons and neutrons enough time to coalesce and create atoms and chemicals. So you might have solved the cosmic background radiation problem, but you've introduced a whole nother problem. How do compounds, how do chemicals form in such a rapid period of expansion? And that's the problem. So it fixes one problem, creates more.
So you didn't come to me. You didn't come with me to this next one. I spoke to Dr. Maceberg's colleague.
Best friend, Maceberg.
Yeah, Dr. Maceberg.
Made so many memes of him.
I'm forgetting his name. He's the professor who, maybe not the, but a professor who's from Iran. Kravat, something like that. I'm probably butchering it. I'm sorry. I hope he's not listening. So I went to talk to him because I figure we're surrounded by professors with PhDs in this kind of thing, so I might as well ask, right? And he said, when I brought up these superstructures that Dan is mentioning right now, he said, yeah, we really don't know. And I said, Dr. Maceberg brought up hyperinflation. Is that a possible theory? And he said, yeah, that's possible. It's a theory out there. And he also said that there are some things even he doubts are true, like theories that are out there that are built to explain these things because no one was there, so no one can say this is how it happened, And so they come up with theories, and I guess you just kind of pick and choose. But you don't pick and choose, but all of them are going to have problems like what Stan's talking about right now.
That's what theoretical cosmology is.
Yeah, absolutely.
That mathematics to try to come up with mathematical explanations, theories, possibilities as to how the universe got that way. So unlike physics, theoretical cosmology can't test their stuff in a lab.
Yeah.
They can do the equations, run them through a computer. It looks good on paper, but in actuality, it's very difficult to explain what these things are. I mean, we don't even know why Uranus is on its side. I mean, this planet orbits the sun at a 90-degree angle to the orbital plane. So it's literally like all the planets going around like this. Uranus is like its north pole is pointing at the sun.
I identify with that.
Yeah. And it rolls. So if you're on Uranus, the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. It rolls opposite the other ways, and it rolls on its side, and all of its moons roll that way too. Nobody knows why it does that. And this is a planet in our own backyard. And so what they suspect, well, maybe it got knocked over. But if it got knocked over that hard, why is it still in the orbit, know? And so I just say this to say that there's so much that we don't know
Absolutely.
about the universe. So when we're speculating about these large structures that we've never
Yeah.
seen, it's like, whoa, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah,
But
it absolutely is.
I like how this mirrors faith a lot. Like Christianity, kind of
It
that
does.
same terrifying. We don't know. We don't have. I mean, I think kind of the part of apologetics is that we try to have more concrete proof, but there's just so much that we don't know. And
That's
like,
a good point, Megan. Yeah,
we just-
apologetics has arguments, but finally you're resting on faith in
Yeah.
a lot of you can't see half the stuff we're talking about.
which is
Mhm.
beautiful and terrifying, I think.
Oh boy.
And another thing, and I hate that I'm forgetting his name right now. He was amazing. He was amazing. He also
I'll do
said,
a
like,
Google.
yeah, real quick, figure it out. Go to the FATC page. He also said, like, when I brought up, I don't think I brought this up, but I mentioned that I was talking to you and that you're a Christian apologist, and
He's like, oh no.
no. Dr. Maysberg was like that, but this guy was not. He was
Okay.
not. He honestly, he didn't even know what an apologist was.
You
so
might
it's
want to
okay.
run by the expansion inflation my explanation because I'm
Sure,
not,
yeah,
I'm not a
that's fine.
scientist. but
No, yeah, that's fine. And
I'll
and
eat my
another
words if I'm wrong.
yeah.
I certainly will.
Would
And
it
another
be
thing that-
Kayvon Offlatoon?
Kayvon, yes,
Anyway.
Kayvon was
He's got an
amazing.
exceptional mustache.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I interrupted
He's
you.
great. Oh no,
Carson,
that's
I'm
fine.
sorry.
Another thing he said was like, when I say that there are theories that you can kind of give or take depending on what you think the problem is. He also said, when people say, well, God is the easier or the more explainable explanation, he's like, well, that's not really an answer for me. Like, so it's either, you can be someone who's like, well, it would just, the creationism would make sense then, or you can be someone who's like, I need like a real answer, not just because someone put it there,
it's I think there's two different explanations that get lost in
Sure.
that, Carson. The idea of this pie, you could totally explain this scientifically. We can run it over to the lab and you can break down what I put in there. You could
Mhm.
find every ingredient of it, and you could totally come in here with a spreadsheet and break down the carbon, sugar, fat, sodium. You could do all that stuff. You could do
Mhm.
a chemical analysis of the pie. And you'd be spot on, and that'd be the coolest thing ever. And you're like, I did test tubes on pie, and you got the chemicals, and you get the A, and you do the report on the chemical nature of the nutritional content of pie. And you could explain chemically all of that stuff.
Mhm.
So that's one explanation, and it's valid. But there's another explanation. How did the pie lattice? How did that all come together? Why is that actually here on this table? And the human sentience of it. So there's whole nother explanation that's perfectly rational and reasonable. The pie is here because I made it and I cared about you and I'm enjoying talking to you and I really wanted to make a good first impression, so I made you pie, and it's the beginning of friendship, and there's all those kinds of reasons that you're not going to catch in the chemical labs. So
Sure.
a lot of times when I hear people say, well, God's not an answer, some people imply that a Christian means that, well, God did it, so I'm not going to look into the chemicals. Well, Dan did it. I'm not going to look into the chemicals of this pie. Dan, I don't want to ruin the pie. I don't want to do a chemical analysis of Dan's pie. That just kind of kills it, But there's nothing wrong with a Christian can say, yeah, God did it, but he can still do chemical analyses. And I think sometimes we look at it either or, and I don't think it's always the case. Well, it's never always the case. That a scientist, sometimes, especially as I've read so many other atheist arguments, like Richard Dawkins will say this, that God is no explanation. And I think what they mean is that people think that Christians are going to not do science because they've come up with God as an explanation. But that's like saying, well, I know a barista made my coffee, so I'm not going to ask her how she did it. Well, so I think there's two different explanations. They're
Sure.
both fully acceptable. It's not an either or, it's both, right? So I can know all the chemicals of pie and I can still know that Dan made it. I can know all the chemicals of the universe and still know that ultimately the universe is an expression, I believe, of God's love and mercy to us, and of his glory mostly, and that's another story. But so yeah, I think sometimes I hear that a lot, and I understand the sentiment. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
God being no explanation.
I think maybe sometimes that is where people come from is,
Yeah.
well, God did it, so I'm not going to worry about
Sometimes
it further
people-
than.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and I don't think that's everybody. I would hope
No.
that's not. I mean, I know not everybody wants to read astronomy books and learn about everything. I don't want to do that. I'd rather just ask questions to people who have read those things and have studied those things. But I think maybe where that comes into conflict is sometimes it seems like not all of them, of course, but sometimes it seems like Christians will knock science, but then sometimes use it too to explain God, and so it's like, well, which is it? Is it reliable or is it unreliable?
There's plenty of science in the Bible. I mean, even when it talks about the ark and what kind of cubes of wood that it uses, there's a lot of metric and there's a lot of recordings in the Bible. There's a lot of science to the Bible, which again is why I've never been a fan of Sunday church, is because I thought it went over those things far too quickly. And I definitely would prefer more in-depth discussions about it. I think there's a lot of science to it. I just think it's overlooked. And
I agree, Carson, that sometimes there's this antagonism where the science is belittled by believers. I've been guilty of that. I poked a little fun at science in our last podcast, but respectfully so. And I think at least for me, the difference that I make between belittling science, not belittling it, but the critique of science that I offer is what I had said earlier about knowing Scripture through the lens of science. The debate about the age question in Genesis has come about from our scientific age with our scientific glasses on. And so the conclusions of science are what I often find myself challenging. Not science as a discipline to find out the chemicals in pie, but the philosophical conclusions about a purely materialistic science that uses science to deny God's existence, which is not what science is created to do. It doesn't have that purpose. But a lot of people will use science to make a case against God's existence, and I think that misuse of science is what I would critique. It's like when Lawrence Krauss, I appreciate Lawrence Krauss. He's a great communicator, but in his latest book, he says the universe is an illusion, and Lawrence has also popularized the idea that we are star stuff. Now there's carbon in our bodies. The suns produce carbon, but when scientists and cosmologists start telling human beings who they are, I think that's when every human being has a right to be able to say something about, well, wait a minute, how come a cosmologist is telling me that I'm just a dead sun?
I'm a star.
I'm a star.
I mean, to be fair, I don't think
that's
such a small thing to be a part of.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I think what I'm saying in terms of what you'd said earlier,
is it just the materialism part bothers you?
I think it's the materialism, the materialistic conclusions, using science to sort of make religion seem outmoded or irrelevant, to say that science has disproven Genesis, to say that science will trump the Bible or any kind of religious understanding of the world. That's the kind of science I'm critiquing, not the everyday worker world of the cosmologists and the astronomers and the physicists and the biologists, and in general, it's a mechanism versus a philosophical conclusion about what you find. You know?
Sure. Yeah.
Something that my mom and I were talking about this, and something that came up. Sounds like something she would say. I'm sure that's what it was, but she was talking about how science is amazing because it explains just how incredible God is in being able to make these things. Like, we live on an earth that spins just fast enough to keep us on it, but not so fast that we get crushed. And there's so many things like that. A little self-plug, because that's who I am. I wrote an Odyssey article called Too Smart to Believe that talks about this and how enamored I am with the idea that science does such a great job in explaining how incredible God is. And I just think it's so cool. And I learned something new and understand how, like, when I was learning about how the cell was made and, like, what parts there are in it and just how complex it is and how everything has a job and every part of it's important and there's not a lot that's superfluous about it. It's like, I can't imagine that being an accident.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes my faith stronger and my sense of wonder stronger when I learn more about what God's done.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, Megan, I'm just reading a book on exoplanets right now, the planets outside our solar system. And the authors, this is published in 2017, and the authors are going into prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell development in an early Earth. So this, like 2 billion years ago, prokaryotic cells became eukaryotic cells. And then eukaryotic cells became multicellular organisms, and here we are. So if that scenario is true, then human beings are sort of a cosmic accident. And I think that's where you really start to ruffle feathers, when you start talking about the origin of human beings, who we are. Do we have a purpose? Did we arrive accidentally, or were we carefully put together? What's interesting is that the authors will say, what is required for intelligence? If we're going to look for ET, right? Mm-hmm. What is required for intelligence in the universe? Well, they say, we need multicellular organisms. right? So we need prokaryotic cells, we need eukaryotic cells, we need some kind of multicellular organism in order to transport intelligence as we know it, right? You need a human body to have human intelligence. And they describe this process in great detail, although they say it's natural. But they say we need cells to be intelligent or to have intelligence. But they don't go so far as to say the process of getting prokaryotic, eukaryotic cells into a multicellular organism is itself a sign of intelligence. So they'll say we need all that for intelligence, but they don't admit that that process to get there is actually also a sign of intelligence. And I thought that's a very interesting paradox that naturalism finds itself.
Okay.
Anyway, I'll
Very
stop
cool.
talking.
No, you're fine. No, you're fine.
I'm just rambling. But I
No,
agree
you're
with
good.
Megan. I think it reveals the glory of God in those things and that design. So
I want to go on to close contender for very first hot button that everybody wants to go to when they're talking about the Bible. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about gay people.
Yay.
Yes.
Okay. So Bible says homosexuality is wrong. Yay, nay. Where are you guys on it?
Okay, where's the
We
verse?
can go in order again.
There's
Yeah.
a verse on this one. I'm
Go
gonna do
ahead.
another Google. This is my
Take your
thing.
time. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
the-
Take your time.
I'm the
which
did you
way around
Google
the
it
table are we
friend.
going?
It really doesn't matter. Whoever
Do
wants
you
to
have an
talk,
answer?
or if
'Cause, like-
somebody just starts talking, like we don't have to go in order.
I will admit I have an answer, but I'm afraid.
No, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
You're outnumbered.
No, I'm sure Carson didn't share it with you, but I'll share it with you. We've been emailing back and forth, and I wanted to be clear before we agreed to do this that we knew where we stood on this issue. And I admitted to her in an email. I says, I have just briefly. I have pleasant and unpleasant experiences with gay folks before I was a Christian and after I was a Christian. I lived and worked in a community in West Los Angeles that was gay, and I got harassed at work. I mean, it was 1920. I didn't know any better. You just went along with it. You just did it. My supervisors were gay. You just don't say anything. It was mostly verbal. Sometimes I get goosed, winked at, accosted. I'd have to take the bus home from West Hollywood, and prostitutes, transvestite prostitutes, gay, would accost me at the bus stop. So this is my 19, 20-year-old. I'm in LA and I want to be a rock star, so I'm like, small price to pay. I'll deal with it, you know. But after I became a Christian, I literally just put that behind me. I didn't want anything more to do with it. I had a very good friend who was gay who had his partner died of AIDS shortly after I became a Christian. It was the worst suffering I've ever seen of any human being. It's horrible disease. When I was in LA, I saw drugs, alcohol, multiple partners, gossip, prostitution, depression, suicide. There was a disgusting underside to it. That I'm not saying that all gay people are like that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just giving you personal background experience as to why I basically walked away from that. I never myself was had those urges, but having saw what I saw, I just turned my back on it completely. And I didn't want to have the conversation because I learned you don't have a conversation about that. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you think there is, and I saw that over and over and over again. And then social media escalates the vitriol. You get off on the screens and Twitter and Facebook and everybody's yelling at each other. I was terrified of the conversation. I have not had a gay friend since my friend Scott in Los Angeles 25 years ago. So Carson, when she reached out to me, I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
It's a trap.
Young lady, I got a history with this, and I literally have. When it comes to this discussion, I have literally avoided it because I don't. I mean, maybe you want to call me, as they say, culturally speaking, homophobic, I suppose, because I've been afraid of not the people. I don't hate the people. I never have hated them. It's the kind of backlash you get from just merely suggesting it might not be the best thing for human beings, and I have never hated gay people. My kindergarten teacher was gay. He loved our family dearly. He was the first man to tell me about Jesus. I know nothing about what his life was like because I was in kindergarten, but my mom told me years later. He loved us. I know he did. Never anything inappropriate. My best friend Scott, when I was in LA, he was gay. We'd go out to dinner, we'd hang out. He would help me with girls and advice and money and everything. I was 19. He took me under his wing, and he was 10 years older than I was. I dearly loved Scott. He was gay, and I knew it. I became a Christian. We kind of separated. Anyway, long story short, as a Christian, I gradually began to understand what the Bible's position was on this. And so I didn't want to have the conversation because I didn't want to. I'm just non-confrontational person. So I told her, I said it was very difficult for me to make this trip, but I wanted to be clear, and if she still wanted to have me on the show, then I would be happy to do it. And she was very gracious about it. And
yeah, just so everyone knows, I told him no one's gonna attack him.
So,
like
No, you're
so,
fine.
and I didn't want to come attacking. I didn't want to come up with that
yeah.
agenda either, because that wasn't going to fly. So
Dan's not a homophobe. He's really
No.
not. Like I've seen homophobe. Dan's not homophobe.
So I wanted to make it clear that I am sincere in the fact that I truly think gay people are people. You know, I think you can fully love somebody and not agree with what they do. You know, I have family members. David, I have lots of atheist friends now. So you love people where they're at. You can't change them. You can share with them what you believe is true, but it's like family. You have family members that you think are absolutely immoral or wrong for something, and you love them anyway. But so my quick 2 cents on this, I had to say that because I didn't want what I was going to say sound condemnatory to any degree. And I'm sure you all are under the penumbra of understanding that people feel like the scriptures are condemnatory about homosexual behavior, and it's a very difficult topic. It is. I mean, it's a volatile topic. We can't have civil topics without people going, "You hate people. You hate gay people. You hate Christians." You know, it's terrible. I did not want to get into that mess. So I drove 550 miles to demonstrate.
You get into the mess.
To get into the mess. God threw me into the mess. Son,
Thank you for jumping in with us.
Son,
Yeah,
go.
absolutely.
Son, go and have the conversation. And it was something that I've avoided for 25 years. I just don't talk about it. I just don't talk about it.
That's reasonable.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, it was just
I didn't like talking about it either
so
when I was a Christian.
So here's my biblical defense of it.
Go ahead.
Okay, and first of all,
We'll go through everyone,
I
so
don't
it's
think it's the worst thing that I don't look at it as what seems to be, culturally speaking, the unpardonable sin of our day, right?
I don't really think any sin is.
No, exactly. So sin is just, from a Christian perspective, theologically, sin manifests itself, I believe, theologically, sin manifests itself in all of us in different ways. We're broken in so many other ways. Our bodies, our minds. I have anxiety. I struggle with depression. My father took his own life. I've struggled with relationships. I've been single all my life because I don't want to bring, I'm old. I'm in bad habits, and I don't want to open myself up to another human being because I'm a mess, right? I'm not perfect, and I understand that. So sin affects us in different ways. And so that's the first thing, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So I'm not sitting here in some moral standpoint of my gay fellow human beings saying that I'm holier than thou. We are all falling short of the glory of God, and it is Christ who is our righteousness. And so in him is where my goodness is, morally speaking. But we all fall short of what we were created to be. So the quick of it is that I believe because of sin has turned us away from our Creator. And again, that takes many forms. Unbelief. I won't list them, but we all know what falling short of the glory of God means. Lying, cheating, stealing, everything that we all know, the familiar litmus tests of sin that manifests itself in our behavior. So because Adam and Eve turned away from God, we all turn away from God. Every one of us has turned away from God. We have all hid our face from him. And he took upon himself the wrath of God's punishment for sin. He who became no sin, he who knew no sin became sin for us. And that's who Christ was. He took upon himself my sin, your sin, everybody's sin of the world. What is it like to bear the sin of the world on your shoulders? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I do, but I don't. Nobody does. So when we turn away from God, then what he does as God, I believe, is he gives us over to those desires that we think will satisfy us apart from him. He just gives us over to them. If you don't want this way of life, and I'm not making the desire, I'm not saying it's illegitimate, I'm not saying you don't have the desire or that the desire is not real. It is real. I don't deny it. I know people that are like, I feel like I was born with this. I feel like This is something that I can't help. This is who I am. That kind of thing. And yet I think the problem is, without an understanding, a biblical understanding of what humanity is, it's very difficult to talk about this topic. What is a human being for? What are we designed for something? Is there a purpose for our human bodies? Are we created for a purpose? What is that purpose? Or are we just dead suns? Are we just carbon that has come out of suns? And I think it's an important question to really get to the root of this. It's not so much homosexual behavior as it is, what is a human being? And once you answer that question, then I think you can begin to answer, what should we do? If we know what a human being is, then by definition we should know what human beings are for, or if they're for a purpose at all. But until we kind of ground ourselves in understanding what we are, and I believe as a Christian we are created in the image of God, and when we fall short of that image, we tend to make up our own purposes and follow our own desires. And so I think homosexuality is just one of many ways in which we fall short of the glory of God and God's design for us. And I don't mean that in a condemnatory way. I don't at all. I just think it is one way, and I can show you in my life how I fall short of the glory of God. I'm not sitting here saying that I don't have my shortcomings either, and I'm not pointing at somebody else and going, "You have that," and no, I have this. I have things too. So I'm not coming down. I'm sort of on the level playing field, saying, "Hey, that's yours. This is mine. We're both sinful. We need Jesus." And I think you can still be a Christian, and I think I know people who have the homosexual tendencies and desires who don't want to follow them, but who want to follow Christ, but who Jesus does not take the desire away. They struggle as Christians with this desire. That's very real. My thing is depression and doubt and anxiety. God didn't take those away. I didn't become a squeaky clean Ken doll that just, I'm happy in my pink Jeep with my girlfriend. That's not my that's not my version of Christianity. I'm still struggling with my own human frailty and sin. So I look at that falling short. I'm with you in the falling short. Now I know you would disagree that you believe that choice is a falling short of the glory of God. But I am saying, from my perspective, that I feel like my falling short is very similar to your falling short. It's just manifests itself differently. So I'm trying to sound that I'm not condemning, but God, that's not the perfect design for us, I don't think. Neither is my doubt or anxiety or depression. That's not, I don't believe that I need to give into that, but I do. And I need Christ for that. So I believe, it's sin. It's sin nature. And I say that with all the love in my heart toward you guys. And I think I can still love you and still understand and be friends with you, knowing that we vehemently disagree morally about that, without hating you. I don't think moral disagreement is not hatred. That's something between you and your Creator. That's what I think the Scriptures say. But my job is my calling. God says, go and love them. And so I haven't done that in 25 years, and truthfully, I need to repent of that. That's why I came.
You did so well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just want you to know that.
That was the nicest way anybody's ever said homosexuality is wrong.
So polite.
It's really okay, Dan. I want you to know that you don't come across at all like the people who are just out there just to say that, just to hurt people.
Well, and that's when you say you're a Christian.
I know that you mean that. So
when you say you're a Christian, what I've found in the 25 years is that, you're like Westboro folks. And I don't mean to put, we're all a mess.
Small minority of Christians.
But the idea of being, especially in social media, the idea of being, and I'm so glad David never brought it up on Dogma Debate, because he's very much an advocate for that. And I understand it. I understand the advocacy. These people are hurting. There's a problem. There's struggles, and David wants to help them, and I get it. But I feel like that is such a hot button, and I'm such if somebody gets angry with me, it's like if you've listened to the Dogma Debate show, you'll hear me go off on tangents and tell stories because I'm nervous. I don't like to be confronted with, David and I talked about slavery, and David got really hot in his chair. He's cool. He's a super guy, and I get along with him great, and I consider him a new friend. But I could tell he was passionate about my answer. I said that there are some forms of slavery in the New Testament that are okay, morally speaking, and tried to make my case. But it's like when you say slavery, all you think of is antebellum South, pre-Civil War. So I'm nervous, and I don't like the confrontation, but I do believe that one can be committed to Jesus, struggle with homosexuality like anything else, or, maybe even not realize it's a struggle. But I think I can still, as a believer, I'm not God. I can tell you what God says, but my job is to love you, not to condemn you.
Okay.
So.
What is everybody else's take on it?
I mean,
Thank you, Dan.
Sure, I'll stop talking.
No, you're fine. Thank you for being as honest as you possibly can. That's all this is about. So, who wants to? Emma, go ahead. Yeah.
I can say personally that, like, I am a Christian, and I also believe that homosexuality is a sin, but I always get very terrified when I tell people that, because
Yes.
I know a lot of people who, like, unlike you, who tried to get as far away as possible from that. I kind of ended up with a lot of friends who were identified with a lot of different, is it gender?
What is
Genders?
the-
I don't
Like
know which.
LGBT?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Well,
Are
avoiding
you,
the
are you
term
talking
like
about gender?
lesbian, queer,
like life-
Sexualities.
Sexualities.
Sexual
okay.
orientation.
I
What's the
always
right
get those confused.
non-offensive term? I don't
I
know
mean,
what
there's
Yeah.
Just-
LGBT plus. Is
Long
kind
as
of a
long as you don't say
long
like the F
blanket.
word, I don't think it's
Yeah.
offensive at all.
Yeah.
The what?
The F word.
Oh.
Like
Yeah.
faggot.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
no, no,
Yeah.
no, no, no.
Or
No,
I think
no, I
actually
said in
queer
a-
is even fine
You
too.
said in an email something about you didn't like the term lifestyle. I didn't know what
Oh,
was
because,
something alternative.
like-
What's better than that for you?
Just saying. I don't like when people say lifestyle, because the way I have sex is not my lifestyle. Like there's so much more to it.
Yeah.
But if you just say
I'd rather
just
be called gay.
just be completely honest and just say I don't like that gay people have sex with each other. I don't know, like, just say it, just say that. It's fine.
Okay.
You can say it. You can say it, and I would appreciate that more personally than kind of dancing.
Yeah, I don't want to come in with my own terms and say this and that.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah, it's
right.
fine. I mean, people say lifestyle, and I know what they mean.
Okay.
It's just like some people, I think they think that it's the LA version of the story,
Yeah.
which is not
No.
everybody's
And by the
version
way,
of
I
it.
got to
Not
back
in
up to
Kansas.
say that I don't think that my experience in Los Angeles is part and parcel every homosexual person.
Oh,
on the
yeah.
planet.
Yeah.
No.
We
I
made it clear. Yeah, you're good.
just had
Yeah.
to tell
It's
you
just
what I
that-
was running away
No,
from.
yeah, it's just that some people do think that's
No,
what it
I
is,
understand that.
and
My
that's,
friend
that's the
Scott-
only reason.
My
yeah.
friend Scott was night and day different than a lot of other flamboyant guys that would have multiple friends.
Yeah.
There was a complete different. My kindergarten teacher, totally different.
Yeah.
So I understand there's
like a normal
there's
dude.
I
different
just
people.
I just don't want people to think I live to
No.
be gay. Like I'm not 12 anymore. Like it's
live for
okay.
it.
Anyway, Emma, continue.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Emma.
Sorry,
And
Emma.
I because I have this physical disability, and I lived most of my day in a wheelchair with a crutch. For a while it was walkers, for a while it was a cane, yada yada yada. I'm kind of an outcast, and I kind of got put into the position of being with other outcasts. Sorry, these are quotes. I don't have a visual on
Air
it.
quotes. We got it.
Air quotes.
Emma is doing air quotes.
Do you need me to be your interpreter?
We can go.
But, like, outcasts or leftovers or whatever you would like to call them, and that was a lot of that crowd of different sexualities and a lot of things that I had never heard of. Like, I had never understood what
Sexual, yep.
pansexuality was, or just any of it, and I understood it. Like, I understood that concept better than I ever could have if I had stayed in a little Christian bubble, which I had been for most of my life. And public high school was a bit of a very shocking and very interesting experience. But I have always been blessed to be surrounded by very understanding people. I have a best friend back at home who she knew exactly how I felt, where my politics were, where my Christianity was on homosexuality. And not 2 years later, she told me she was a lesbian, fully knowing that I would still love her because she was my best friend. And so, like, it's always it's still, though today is a very rough subject because I am a Christian and because I consider it a sin. And like you said, falling short of the glory of God. And it's like, I still want you to know that I love you, and I will show you love and kindness, and I will treat you like everybody else, because we are all sinners and we all fall short of the glory of God. But because there's that stigma of hatred hatred towards that specific sin, especially, it's very hard to get or to come at people with that kindness, because because sometimes, and this isn't everybody, but sometimes people just are not.
They take it personal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't say I blame them, because this same friend, a couple years later, my dad does this group at our church for adult college age students. It's kind of like a youth group, but for older kids, and it's meant for discipling, which is a really, really good idea. And I've learned more in that class than I did in like Sunday school. And it might be because my dad's teaching it and I listen more to my dad, but whatever. But like, I invited her not to be the friend that's like, oh man, I'm gonna convert her, because it was a fun time and they were great people, and I wanted her to meet some of my church friends.
You wanted to share something that was special to you.
Exactly. But that night, my dad had given us a 2-minute challenge to talk about our testimonies. And this one very young Christian, who went way over 2 minutes, started ranting about how wrong homosexuality was, specifically while she was sitting at the table with her rainbow bracelet, because she is very proud of who she is. And she was very, very angry. But she handled it well. But it's like, I can see why there's this disconnect between two people because of stuff like this. And it's some Christians can be very brutal to homosexuals, and it really makes me sad and mad, because everybody needs love.
Yeah, and if I could follow up with what Emma's saying, there's often a scripture that's quoted, and I think it's quoted with the idea that I'm a Christian, you're gay, this is for you, this doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
And it's Romans 1, and it says, since the creation of the world, God, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they, us, all of us, are without excuse. But people see they in there, and they automatically say, well, that's you guys, that's the unbeliever, that's the gay person, but it's all of us.
Mm-hmm.
For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. So, the verse that's often quoted with atheists is, the fool says in his heart, there is no God,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, well, see, that's us. That is everybody before a holy God. There's nobody that can go, see, I'm not like that.
You're almost a fool for not thinking you're a fool.
No, it's sometimes, I've heard it used so many times, especially by Christian apologists sometimes, where you say, they'll quote this to the atheist, the fool has said in his heart there is no God. But the failure is on the part of the person sharing that to recognize that they are themselves that fool. That there's no one, in Romans 3, there's no one that seeks God. And if Jesus didn't come seeking me, I would have nothing to do with him. There are days that I don't want to be a Christian. There are days that I don't want to follow Jesus. I need him far more than I want him.
Mm-hmm.
Like a kid going to the dentist. Who wants to have a long needle going down into their molars? Nobody. He needs it more than he wants it. But the idea for me, at least, it's why it's taken me 25 years, is that because God has had to get rid of my self-righteousness. It's not. I'm not going light on this passage. This is me. I'm exchanging the glory of God for images and corruptible things and for my own desires, and God gives me over to the lust of my heart too. And so I'm not going soft pedaling on the scriptures. I'm saying I'm there with you. I mean, I'm not condemning my fellow men and women, but like what Emma was saying, when you try to read, I think a lot of the hatred comes from the superiority that sometimes I've taken as a Christian in condemning other people who don't see it the way I see it, rather than putting myself in the shoes of fallen human beings and say, we're all fallen. We all need Christ. Here's how he has manifested his love to me, and here's how I know that I need him more than I did 25 years ago when I became a believer. I was a snot 25 years ago. I thought I knew the world and had all the secrets to the universe revealed to me. And now I'm almost 50, and I feel like I know less than I did. I know more about what God has done and much more about my own personal sin. So as you guys get older, you will you live to be 49, 50, you'll see, how great God is and how terrible our sin is. And so I second what you say, that the anger, I can understand your anger and frustration with Christians who handle this, because it incites anger. It causes anger. It's not the scripture actually isn't the offense. It's the one delivering the message sometimes that is more offensive than what the message actually is.
Oh yeah. I honestly,
Yeah.
I don't think that part is the worst part of the Bible. So like when people get upset about it, I'm like, I could show you something worse.
Yeah.
You want to bet? It's really okay. It's
Yeah.
really okay.
So I don't mean to say that I'm soft pedaling the message of sin. It's sin is sin is sin. And I agree with Emily, but I don't like to say that, because I too, like Emma, I'm afraid of the backlash that somebody's gonna throw at me for saying that. There's so much baggage there, and because I saw it when I was 19. I wasn't a Christian then, but I saw the kind of the ugliness of it, and I didn't want to confront that. I'm a bubble believer. Have been a bubble believer too most of my life, So but I'm more like the outcast myself. I can identify.
Megan, I'm very interested in knowing what you think about all this.
So this would be the time that 75% of the Rust family should take off their headphones and ask another person to listen until they can come back on, so they will not get spicy.
Boy, here we go.
I love my
I like
family,
that
but
word.
we often have different beliefs. Number one,
Yes. What is it?
the Bible says no, that homosexuality is definitely a sin, and that's unequivocally, man was made for woman was made for man, but they also say that sex is not for pleasure, that you shouldn't have any sort of family planning in the sense of having sex with a condom is not something you're supposed to do, because sex is only to make a family. So if you want to wait, I mean, you can't. If you want to do it, then you're gonna have to accept that you might have a kid, and so there's a lot of these kinds of things that I'm like, okay, I understand. This is what the Bible says. This is what God says. And I mean, I saw a picture. It's like God doesn't look at our sins like a bar graph, bar graph, right? Yeah, with the lines. It's just you look at the top of it, and it's all squares, and it's all the same size square, and we're all sinning. And no matter what, this is what it is. I personally think that I'm such a disaster that I have no area to judge anybody for anything that they do. Because that's not my job. And I am very pleased that we have, just take a deep breath before I say this, safe spaces. Where people, I know, it's hard, where people can come and you can say, I have a different opinion than you. This is what it is. This is why I believe this. And we can be like, yes, you have a different opinion, and this is why you believe it, in a respectful way.
That's your opinion of what a safe space is?
That's not
Well,
a
if,
safe
if
space.
that's not a safe
Safe
space,
in
that
a
would be a
safer
good
space,
one.
maybe.
But
should be
that
what a
sounds like
safe
an
space is.
amazing space to be in, right?
I
I
think
think
that
we-
should
we-
be less of a space and more of a everywhere.
We are in a safe space right now,
We
according to
are.
your
Yeah.
definition.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
is
And isn't it cool?
You made it, Megan. You created it. Way
Just
to go.
flipped my hair, if anybody wanted to know, even though it's in a bun.
KFHS College Radio Showcase Safe Space Volume 1.
there it is.
And I know that often there's not a lot of spaces in which you can have these kinds of conversations.
No.
And people don't get mad, and so I'm happy that we could have this kind of conversation with you, because I know it must be really hard, and you did such a good job. I just want you to know that I feel like you keep apologizing, but don't apologize.
He's an
Well,
apologist.
No,
That was mine for the night.
I will tell you.
Thank you. Have you been holding that in?
No.
I will tell you. I talked
Spontaneous.
to all the adults in my life who are in charge of me.
Your parents?
I have many. I am still 18. No, I ran it by several friends. I was like, hey, this young lady up in Fort Hays, Kansas, wants to have a conversation with me on her podcast, and she's gay. Why are you going to Kansas to talk to a gay college student, Dan? and
Well, when you put it like that.
no, I mean, these are my friends. These are guy accountabilities.
Yeah.
You know, and they thought, I've arranged it so we're all feeling comfortable and everything's fine. But really, the reaction was, but then I had two friends who said, no, I think this is really of the Lord that you need to do this. And I was like, yeah. I mean, I don't do this. This is new territory for me. And I was like, people gave me money to come up here and do this. I mean, Carson and I were talking about the emails. I got extra work to do this, and I got people gave me some money to come up here and make this trip. So I was like, okay, the Lord is doing it.
Yeah.
I need to go. And so I struggled with it, but I knew that I needed to come and get out of my comfort zone. And I was like, Lord, what are you doing? You sure got the right person? What are you doing, God? But this is exactly how he acts
At my life.
Yep.
But I think the thing that might make people a little bit angry is that our beliefs, our personal beliefs, are not something that we should push onto somebody else. And I get very frustrated when I see people saying, well, in the eyes of the law, our actual law, since God says this is not okay, then it's not okay, and people shouldn't have rights because God says it's not okay. That's really frustrating because I am a huge believer in separation of church and state. And it makes me angry that people use the fact that they're a Christian to bully other people into believing their specific Christian beliefs. And homosexuality is a really big hot button topic, and like the whole thing about transgender bathroom issue, which shouldn't be an issue because it was never an issue before.
I was like, Starbucks has unisex bathrooms.
Yeah.
Like, they've always had those.
Yeah.
Like,
Dan was like, problem solved.
Honestly.
put unisex bathrooms in there.
Well,
you
one
know?
thing
I
to
mean,
that, Megan, I mean, it makes sense to me because if people really think it's just bad, like pedophile bad, I'd want to outlaw it too. You know, so like I don't blame people when they think it's that bad that they want it to not be something that we can achieve. You know, it's kind of like the thing, like when people get upset about this being in the Bible, and I'm like, I don't know. I think you could find something worse. You know, I just don't think it's that bad of a thing, and I understand where people are coming from. You know, when they think that they should. It's not. Some of them, I think it's. Well, I get more of a say than you do, but some of them, I think they really are just trying to save people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so
frustrating.
it is, but I understand where they're coming from.
I don't know. I think that a lot of people have decided that they're going to read these parts of the Bible that they like. They're going to tell me I can't go into ministry because I'm a woman. They're going to tell me that I need to be subservient to my husband because there's a verse in the Bible about that.
That's a very rough subject.
Yeah, well, God made us equal, and he says it in the Bible too, but that's not always something that's been spoken about. But they like to tell me these things because the Bible said so, but they don't want to love their fellow man. They don't want to give to charity. They don't believe in being accepting. And honestly, I think the church has a lot of work to do to reach out to people who are different than us, often in the LGBTQ plus community, because we don't do a good job of ministering to the other. And I don't think that the other is a concept that should exist, but it's like, you're going to need something different from church than I am, because I can go to like young couples Bible study and it's like, oh yeah, okay, sure, whatever. But that might not be an option for you. Or you might not want old church ladies trying to hook you up with somebody because it's not fun, but it might be even harder for you. And so I think that the church has a lot of shortcomings right now in ministering to its people, and it's really frustrating. And that's what I think.
Okay, thank you, Megan.
You're
what about
welcome.
you, Caroline? Your turn.
Darren, do you
or
have anything to
Darren,
say?
like whoever, Stephanie, whoever. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
All right.
Here we go. Buckle up.
I know this is my least favorite conversation. So I'm gay, but I'm also a Christian. I'm very religious. I find it to be very interesting. I would recommend anybody who says that homosexuality is a sin to look up Matthew Vines. Have you guys ever heard of him?
No.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Matthew Vines?
Yes. So this is a guy, he actually came from Wichita. And he kind of, I guess one could say, interpreted the Bible for what it says about homosexuality. And I think he has probably either a bunch of YouTubes on it, but I remember hearing it, or like either like on Audible or something. But Matthew Vines, I definitely would recommend just listening to it. And I was listening to it as far as like whatever he says I'm going to disagree with or I'm going to agree with, like just listen to it to see a different perspective. So personally, I don't think homosexuality is a sin. And I think it's interesting when people will say, like, no, I'm on equal grounds, like, you're a sin, I'm a sin, so I can say that, and it's not offensive. I do find it offensive. I do know that you guys mean it in the best way. I guess for me, because I think somebody mentioned it, it's more of how it's presented than, like, what it actually says. And that definitely makes a difference. A lot of people do like to come at you with Bible verses, and they kind of like stab you with it, you know? And that can go with anything. And I really believe, like, whether you agree it's a sin or you agree or disagree that it's a sin, you can kind of interpret the Bible almost in any way that you want it to. So it's almost hard to say, like, who's right or who's wrong, except for there's a majority of people who say it's wrong compared to a very minority group who say it's right. Or, you know, vice versa, whatever that is. I think a scripture that always hits me, or like a lot of people like to remind me of, and I can't remember the name, and I should. And you have to like help me because I feel like you would know it. Because the one that they always kind of get me at, they're like, well, the homosexuals, they raped people at that.
Because God, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes,
Sodom and Gomorrah,
yes.
yeah, Genesis.
Do you know that scripture well enough to just kind of brief it real quick?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I bring this one.
So Abraham has a nephew named Lot, and God has come down to Abraham and said, Abraham, you know, I'm about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, get out of there. And Abraham is pleading with God to, you know, Lord, if there were 10 righteous people there, would you destroy it? He said, I would not destroy it for 10 righteous people. Or if there were 5 righteous. So Abraham goes through this series of questions. And so what's being demonstrated there is God's mercy and the severity of what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway, so there's some angels that come into the house, and that they, the men of Sodom and Gomorrah want to lay with them. And I get this, and it's, I've got to go back and read it. But briefly, it's a real decadent portrait of a horrible, I mean, probably worse than anything we can even conceive of. You know, I mean, it's just an insatiable. It's worse than Vegas. It's worse than. I mean, it's really a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. So I think if what I'm hearing, what you're saying is contextually, when somebody reads that verse to you, you're like, whoa.
The number one thing that people will kind of brief that verse up to me is that
let me
something in there where like homosexuals, they raped people. That's why homosexuality is bad, because these people raped them, men laid with men or something in that sense. So therefore their actions was due to their sexuality. Therefore, because of their sexuality, and they raped people. Therefore, homosexuals are bad, and that's why God condemned it. The problem that I have with that is, can you literally tell me that there's nowhere else in the Bible where a straight person raped another person? So like why is it that because the sexual orientation of one rape is bad compared to a different sexuality of rape is bad to another? If that makes sense, like.
Well, there's passages in Leviticus that outlaw that talk about heterosexual sins of sexuality. I think it's
I was
about to ask you.
It's Leviticus 22.
Right. Yeah.
Or
so
21,
there's
22,
proof that
20. It talks about if there's a man who does this, if there's anyone who does
Yeah.
this, if there's a man who does this with a woman, if there's a man who does this
Right.
with a sister.
And so from
There's-
there,
Blah, blah, blah,
they
blah.
say their
Yeah.
actions that rape, it's bad. But for whatever reason, their sexuality, which is sexual, is not a sin. Just their
No,
actions.
yeah.
But because in this other scripture that I was mentioning, because the rape and their sexuality was homo, therefore being a homosexual is a sin. And that to me just doesn't make sense.
That's
like,
because
why?
people pick the parts of the Bibles they like.
I've never heard that argument. That's really
I actually have never heard that.
It might have been
either.
because I'm gay and you guys aren't.
That's quite possible.
very
That'll
possible.
do it.
And I think
That
that's
is
the
it.
big difference. Is to me, is like, I hear one sexuality straight, they rape, but rape is bad. But if a homosexual rape, homosexuality is bad. Like, to me, it doesn't click that one sexuality would be a sin, whereas a action would be a sin, and it's not lined the same way.
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, the argument is terrible that somehow homosexual rape is worse than heterosexual rape. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
though we
That's
would disagree,
something.
I think the core of what God is saying is that what I was saying earlier is that all being fallen, we all have a different, the confusion of our identity is, and not just what particular behaviors we might be practicing, but the general confusion because of sin, the general confusion of our own identity, who we are, what we're for, and that kind of thing. So I think what we're talking about in terms of the sexual behavior, it really is rooted in the identity of the human person. So I think but I think you're right.
I guess to me, it's like, I
to
still
point that out is
understand
wrong.
Yeah.
The idea that it's worse to be gay and rape somebody than it is to be straight and rape somebody, it's
right.
the
It's
rape
just
is
doesn't
bad.
make sense.
Strange
like, why
argument.
would
And that's a strange
this-
argument.
And
I've
that's
never-
why I don't understand. Like, why would people say homosexuality is a sin? Like, that's still where I don't get it, because they're not using the same, at least in that scripture sense, they're not using the same laws to deem that sinful among other sexualities.
That's confusing and odd, but I do have a verse that's a little more concrete.
Is it Leviticus?
Yeah.
I was just about to ask.
Okay,
Is
wait. Who here is wearing a polycotton blend? Because if we're talking Leviticus, then we are
Okay.
sinned.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, no.
Emma, are you about to bring
I
up?
had a friend who
Go ahead.
who had brought this up, and I'd remembered it while I was reading it, because there was a lot of talk through chapters and chapters about Leviticus, about things that are unclean, specifically
Right.
unclean things you need to get out of the general populace and purify yourself for before re-entering the population and sacrificing to God, and then everything's back to normal. But this specific section of the chapter, it's the word usage is so important, because a lot of these things, like the polycotton blends, or like, I don't know what
Shellfish.
word that is. Shellfish. A
There's
lot of
of
these
rules we
things
no longer follow.
are
That's
unpure.
because we're not Jewish anymore. So Leviticus doesn't actually really count.
But this section,
There are some verses in the New Testament about it as well.
Oh,
I
yeah.
lost.
But I don't think Leviticus is
I
the best argument right
Okay,
now.
no,
No, I mean, you're totally right, and I totally want to hear it. I'm just saying.
Yeah, read the verse and then,
Yes,
and then
please.
we'll ask
Please
about
share.
it.
okay. This specific part, and dang it, I lost the verse.
Is
Dang
it Leviticus 20:13?
No, it's 22.
That's the one I had. It's 2013.
Yeah, I'm looking at that.
It's this section where it talks about immoral things like pedophilia, like.
Yeah, that's chapter 20.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I'm also looking at 22 where I found the verse.
Oh, okay. In the rules for the priests? Is that where you're looking?
It might be. Yeah, holiness in the priests. But it talks a lot
Should
about.
have brought my Bible.
Yeah, you
Dang it.
should have.
But 2013 is one that I hear a lot.
If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death.
It
Their
might
blood is
be.
upon them.
It might be in 20. I could have sworn I saw it in 22.
So do you conceptually, I know Megan was touching about it, but the cultural implications of when you go back to the Old Testament and you dredge up something and point out it as a sin, that the conceptual idea that we have to understand, I think, first of all, is that Christ took the penalty of people breaking the Levitical law.
Oh.
That's what his righteousness. He took he did two things.
Oh.
Go ahead, Emma.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
it was-
No. I was just
Did you
filling in the
find it?
gap.
It was 1822. That's where I made the
18
mistake. Under unlawful sexual relations.
1822.
And it is.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination.
That's what I just read. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
The
well, that's
Levit-
in
Leviticus?
2013. Yeah, then that's
Okay.
in 2013 as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Romans 1, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And then later, those who practice such things deserve to die. And that's in the New Testament.
Now, remember the context of what I was saying about, for me, I'm in that. We're all in, I'm in that. I'm not saying.
Yeah. Oh,
that-
yeah.
that-
It mentioned there are more things in that
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
passage than just that, but that's definitely one of them.
I'm surprised people don't bring that up as much as they bring up Leviticus. Because I feel like
I
that's
don't-
more
I
explicit,
know.
and
I
it,
only know that verse because I read it recently because
Yeah.
I'm going through.
You're doing the
cover to
read-through?
cover.
Right. Yeah.
I
I'll
just
pro-
feel like that's like, it kind of shows when you use the example that you hear a lot, and the
Yeah.
example from Leviticus kind of shows a fundamental
It's definitely more
misunderstanding of the Bible.
straightforward,
Yeah, it's-
language.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
compared to some of the stories
Yep.
that people, because even with the scripture that I had mentioned, it talks about a sister city, which like you would have to study more about the sister city and what that means. But yeah, there's a lot more scripture that's probably more point blank. Again, it's been a while since I've kind of drove into this, but I would really highly recommend Matthew Vines. Like I really hope that you guys kind of listen to what he says and how he describes it, because he can definitely explain it a lot more than I do, and he definitely explains how he would say God made us all in his own image, or like how you were made is perfect in how you were made, and he kind of explains like I think one of those scriptures is if you are straight but then you lay with another man, obviously you weren't born to lay with another man, you were born to lay with another woman. That would be wrong. But he says like, well, what if you were born gay? Like, wouldn't it be an abomination if you were gay and you were meant to lay with, in my case, a woman, and I was meant to lay with another woman? Wouldn't it be an abomination if I then lay with another man whom I was not actually made for? And some might say that's quite a bit of a stretch. But I think it's an interesting perspective to look at. And Matthew Vines can definitely explain it far more better than I can. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Would anyone like to add anything to that conversation?
Yes, Jeremy.
I will add. So
Come on with the come on.
the Bible does say that being gay is a sin. As far as like my own personal beliefs, I know growing up, because I am gay for those that do not know. As far as like me growing up, like if I were to think about like if there is a creator, obviously like there's a God and there's Satan, so it would make sense if like some things are good and some things are bad, and that's kind of because it does say like being gay is a sin. I would be like, okay, well then I guess like
I guess it is.
I guess it. Yep. I guess it's bad. But I think, and as far as like Jehovah's Witnesses go, they've gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. But it's like, well, I was lucky enough to be born into a religion where we don't really believe in hell, so there isn't like this eternal torture that was hung over me. It was like, yeah, if you do this, you'll be tortured forever, which is really nice. But just like how it may be bad, but God doesn't hate you for it. I think is what they've been trying to go into. I know a couple years ago they had something like in one of their magazines they hand out, the Watchtower, where it talked about like telling other Jehovah's Witnesses like don't be homosexual, like not homosexual but homophobic, it's bad. Like they were like not like hating
Both are
people.
bad. Being homosexual
being
and
bad.
homophobic. Both equally bad.
But they were talking about how it's not necessarily like something that like you were to judge the other person, but
Yeah.
like it's something that
That's kind of like the whole like
Yeah.
everybody's the same.
Yeah.
everyone's
kinda
the
thing
same
that
sort of
Emma
thing,
and Dan were talking about,
and just
yeah.
like going away from hating people because of like a certain thing. You can like not like I know you touched on it, but you can like someone but not agree with how they live their
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
And you certainly
nice.
gonna. I mean, even in the atheist community now, I know David is dealing with this. That there's such political dissension.
Oh, yeah.
And there's
Yep.
such division between social justice warriors and
Oh yeah.
so that there's division that runs deep, and it doesn't have to be this issue. This issue just seems to come up. I like to interject this. That there was a guy in the Old Testament who got put to death for picking up sticks on the Sabbath. So the idea of being put to death, we sort of the hatred. I think that you guys have seen. I know I certainly haven't seen it to the extent that you all have experienced. But I think it comes from, for whatever reason, putting this particular behavior on a pedestal, like it was the worst thing.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
like if there was only one sin that we want to
Sin
have in the
of
Bible,
sins, yeah.
it's going to be this kind of sin and this kind of sin only, and this is the unpardonable sin, and this is the one we don't talk about, and you can't possibly be friends with gay people, and blah 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 blah. So I think a lot of the vitriol comes down from that idea that I can't change your mind. Like 20 years ago, I would have walked out of a discussion like this and felt like if I didn't change anybody's mind, that I wasn't angry enough, or I didn't. I mean, but I think the only thing that really, as I said to Carson earlier, I think the only thing that really is going to transform anybody's mind about that is, for me, as a heterosexual male who, before he was a Christian, I was pursuing relationships with women, and they're not satisfying. I'm not saying that women aren't. I'm just saying that looking at them.
I'm saying that.
I am looking at. Sorry, I knew that was going to come out bad.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
No,
Just messing with
the
you.
idea of trying to find, the typical heterosexual male identity in female relationships, the way men are supposed to have relationships with girls. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Like, do you mean like who wears the pants?
Yeah. Well, kind of. Like the.
Who's the man in the relationship?
Yeah.
We love those questions.
Problematic.
No, I don't mean to get into that, but I'm saying that as heterosexual, that I could find there's a way to go about a false identity and a false pursuing this desire that I think, if I have a girlfriend or I have, that's going to be satisfying, and I end up using that person.
Right. You're trying to relate.
Yeah. I'm using that person for some way, and what I think now as a Christian, what I think is that all of us. And C.S. Lewis talks about this, that our desires, whatever they are, heterosexual, homosexual, for whatever, for pie, for food, for drugs, for alcohol, for sex, whatever it is, we all have them right now on the table. We all have our desires that we deal with. That Lewis points out, and I think this is true, because of sin, our desires are not strong enough. So the desires that you have, the desires that I have, even for a healthy heterosexual relationship or even a monogamous relationship between the same sex, these desires are falling short of what God's ultimate desire is for us, and we don't
like the lust of people.
Because it's like we all have urges. I want to keep eating, right? And so it's easy. The pie's right there. Just keep eating, and blah, 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 blah. It's just easy. I'm satisfying a desire, but it's not the highest and best desire. And I don't. And I think the thing is too, because of sin, we're never actually going to be completely fulfilled this side of eternity. We're always going to fall short of feeling completely fulfilled. Something in our bodies, something in our minds, something about our nature is going to be broken. And so whatever the desire is, I think that's kind of a settling, if you will. Not being the best, not having the best. And I don't mean that in a condemnatory sense, but just that's me. I mean, I settle for, I'm easily pleased, far too easily pleased. I'll just sit at home, drink coffee, and read books, and pretend to argue with people. And pretend to be a Christian, and instead of engaging people. And but I'm grateful for hearing your stories, because it's like I've had my head in my ears like this for 25 years about it. I don't know what.
Yeah, I hope I didn't come on too strong. Maybe
Oh,
passionate.
No,
sure.
not at all. Not at all. No. I knew this was going to be tough for me.
It was coming.
And so it's a learning experience. I have to come, and I'm like, I come here not to sort of teach, but also to learn, because there's some catching up to do in terms of understanding where people are coming from. And we all have a wonderful variety of experiences and backgrounds that have put us where we are right now. And I feel like, I don't know, it's weird. I could share something about why it would be weird. It might make Carson feel uncomfortable.
What are you going to say?
I'm intrigued.
If you don't mind, I'd just take a minute to tell the backstory. And
We've unlocked your tragic backstory?
yeah, tragic. This is a good backstory.
Okay.
Cool.
I'm ready.
I have about 18 years, and it was 1999. I had a dream of the Minnesota Vikings. I'm not a big football fan, and I didn't know any. I was living in Tennessee at the time. There's no way I should have had a dream about this football team. I like football, but I don't watch it religiously. And I had this very vivid dream, and I woke up and I felt like there was a man at the center of the stadium. The stadium was empty, and he was a heavy-set black gentleman. I didn't know who he was. I told my roommate about the dream, and he says, "That's the coach of the Minnesota Vikings." He was black. He was a black guy. And I looked up online. It was him. I didn't even know who he was. I didn't even know what his name was. I had a dream about the coach of the Minnesota Vikings. I knew nothing about him. And I was stunned all at once that I had to write a letter to coach. I said, I had a dream about you, and you were in an empty stadium, and you were very happy. I don't know what it means. Yeah, nuts, completely nuts, right? And I had this impression. And it just got, my roommates are like, yeah, whatever. You know, I was a baby Christian. I had been a Christian for about 4 years, but I was like, God wants me to write to him, and it was kind of the same impression I had coming up here. I had to do it anyway. So I wrote him a letter and I mailed it to Minnesota, and I forgot about it. I was like, okay, that was dumb. I was actually engaged, the only time I was ever engaged in my life, to my fiance, and she thought I had lost my mind, and I was like, oh, what did I do that for? So I forgot about it, and it was around Christmas time. And I'm at home doing my laundry, and I'm about to go see my aunt in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm getting ready to go on the trip. And the phone rings, and it is the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. He got my letter, and he called me. And I didn't leave my phone number in the letter. I told him where I worked. He called my work. He told them who he was. My work gave him my home phone number, and he called me. And I thought it was my friends joking around. But it turned out that week that the Minnesota Vikings were coming to Nashville to play the Tennessee Titans.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that week. And he offered me sideline pass tickets. I got to stand on the sidelines with the Minnesota Vikings that year. And we went into the locker room, and I said, Coach, I don't know what's going on. And he told me what my dream meant to him. He says, I don't need a stadium full of people to make me happy.
Ooh.
Oh.
And apparently he was trying to buy the football team at the time. So I don't know how my dream affected, that decision or whatever, but we prayed together, and that was.
No way.
And since Coach Green passed away a couple of years ago, but anyway, so this is going to be a little weird,
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
and I hope you please don't take
Did you have a
offense.
dream about me?
Yeah.
No, I had a very strong impression though,
Oh, okay. Continue.
and it's not.
Dang
I'm not predicting the future.
Okay.
And I felt like being Christmas time, I felt like the story that our story is kind of similar to the story in Luke, where the angel comes to Mary. You know the story? The Annunciation.
To tell her that she's going to be pregnant with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm not saying you're going to be birthing Jesus or anything like that.
Dang it. Could have been so famous, you
But
guys.
when I started to get to know you through your emails, and I had an impression. I knew I had to come. That was the Dennis Green thing. I had to write the letter. I had to come up here. I had to do this. But so I go on a limb. My heart's pounding. I'm like, I don't know if I should say this, but because it's not. It's going to sound like I'm trying to tell you to be different, and I'm not. I'm just saying that I got the impression that you're going to be a mom one day.
Yes. Yay.
Leave me alone.
What you don't
And
see
maybe-
is
Continue.
Carson having
Maybe-
a crisis.
Maybe, well, the only reason I say this, because I can't tell you, Carson, as I've been thinking about this and I pray about it and I think about it. What am I going to say? What am I going to say? What am I going to say? If I tell her that, she's going to freak out, slap me, get mad, tell me something. But
I just pretended to slap him.
but I could not shake that I had to tell you that.
Okay.
And I feel like, and I'm going to go one more step.
Okay, go ahead.
And
Just do
We're
it.
already there.
Just do it. We're already there as
Some
people.
people.
Just go as
All
far
of
as you
us
want,
are
Dan.
fortunate.
it may be a son, it may be a daughter, but they will
Hopefully
be
a daughter.
They will be extraordinarily special. What does that mean? Does that mean they're going to be cure cancer or solve a mystery?
Not
or
important.
It's not important. It's important that it's going to be incredible for you. I don't know if that's adoption. I don't know if
Alright.
that's biological. I have.
That was going to be my
I
next
have.
question.
I don't have specifics.
He
I'm
said he
not being
doesn't know.
I'm not being a swami, but as I got to know you, I said she would be, and I felt like maybe it was just me thinking this. Maybe I'm not saying God is telling me to tell you this. I just felt like you're going to be a mom one day.
Like a good mom? Or
very
like
good-
a...
very-
Okay.
Just a mom.
Very-
You will be a good mom.
very good mother.
There's no
I
way
thought that one was
There's
a
no,
given.
there's no way.
Well, I
in
didn't know
fact-
because you just said a mom, and I was like, well, there are lots of
No.
different moms.
No, I really think that was the strongest impression that I'm talking to somebody that's going to
That's
be a mom.
probably my
one
favorite
day.
thing of tonight.
I'm so happy right now.
I hate you guys.
Can we talk just on the on the discussion of motherhood? I just have to put this out there because it's something I think about almost daily. So I don't know if you guys have this, but I have questions I want to ask God when I die.
Yeah, I've got some questions too.
I have one
I have
question.
questions
one
I wanna
question
ask
only.
him
Not that
now.
he'll be there.
Okay, maybe we should just all go around the table and say the one question we would ask him.
Yeah.
Because my question is, Immaculate Conception. Was Jesus a zygote? Where did he start?
Well, the Immaculate
That's-
Conception was Mary being born from a sinless mother. Immaculate
Yeah,
Conception
that's
is the
Mary.
Catholic doctrine of Mary's birth.
Yeah. So there's your answer.
Mind blown.
Okay.
So
wait.
Mary's birth, Mary was this is not in the scriptures. This is Catholic doctrine.
Right.
That the Immaculate Conception is actually the conception, the birth of Mary. She was believed to have been born sinless,
Okay.
or her mom was sinless, or she was born. One or the other, but it's pertaining to Mary and not Jesus. People get the
So
it's Catholic
Jesus
doctrine.
A
and
was a
people-
zygote.
bloodline, it seems like.
I just, I think
Well,
about this daily.
Megan, I think he was because he, in every way, he was a human being.
Hmm.
So he was where did it come from? God created the zygote, but he was human being from the first cell, I think.
Okay.
That's of course, the Bible doesn't tell us eukaryotic
Right.
Yeah.
development of Christ in utero. But,
Right.
I think because of his humanity, he was human from start to finish.
That's reasonable.
That would be my scientific.
Now I have to think of another big question I think about daily.
But you said you would ask that to God, and I'm not God, so no.
I understand. I understand.
Yeah.
What would you
There's a
ask?
theory.
I would ask, he went through trouble. He went through making this complex world that we live in, and all these little attributes from the little cells and all the mechanics of the human body and all the mechanics of the world. And he made us, and he made the galaxy around it, and he made millions of galaxies around us, and I want to know why.
I can tell you.
Tell me.
Please.
I'm like being. It's coming directly from Scripture. I just read this yesterday.
Really?
Yes. Because my friend Wayne and I were talking about this.
Because this is
Because why did God make planets that can't be inhabited or that we can't even see, or galaxies, distant worlds, or whatever? Here it is. For by him, Jesus, this gets back to Genesis, our discussion of creation. For by him, Jesus, all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created by him, here it is, and for him.
You want to look at it.
Those are there primarily for Jesus.
Cool.
Yes.
Awesome.
There you go.
Like a mic
Now
drop.
he shares it with us. So when you hear people argue about, well, the universe seems like a waste if it was made for man. Well, it is made so that it can be inhabited. God said that the earth, he made the earth to be inhabited. But the universe, the whole thing is not finally for us. It is for him, for Jesus. So when we study the universe, and this is why I love to study the universe, because it gives us insight into the attributes of Christ, who is the light of the world. So, but there's probably more to that you might want to ask him if I don't. I feel like Santa's helper.
Well, I
I'm fielding
appreciate this because I remember asking one of my pastors once, and he couldn't help me with that answer, and it's been driving me crazy my whole life.
And when you think about the universe, Emma, there's nothing else. It is so majestic. It is so beautiful. It is so enormous. It is so huge. It is so vast and so wonderful. Let me give you goosebumps even more.
Uh-oh.
You ready for this?
No.
Bring it on.
Okay. In the Gospel of Matthew is one of the times when the word heaven and heavens are used over 70 times.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. That's your inheritance, Emma. That's a picture of your inheritance in Christ, the universe.
Man.
Yeah. So that stuff's going to pass away. That's just a light metaphor of what eternity is for those who are poor in spirit, meek in heart. So remember Genesis, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. That's why I think Genesis is literal days, because Jesus is saying, I made this for you. I made it in a way that you can understand it. I made it for you. I made it to be inhabited. It is my love. It is my glory. It is for me, but I share my kingdom with you. If you are poor in spirit, if you are broken, look up. Your redemption draws nigh. That is what you have waiting for you in heaven.
Dang, that's cool.
I'm getting God bumps.
Very cool.
Oh,
Well, it's getting close. I should really let you guys go, but yeah, we'll go through
God questions? I seem to be answering them. This is terrible.
I mean,
All right.
I don't want to say I'm God.
I feel a little bad because my questions are not as deep as the other two that were given.
Mine
but
was just why is zygote
touche.
like
Jared,
touche.
Jared, there's a shallow end and a deep end of a pool, but it's all a pool.
That is true. All right, so I'm gonna jump in. The question is, I would ask, I'd like, God, may I please see what the forbidden fruit looked like?
yes.
Oh, that's
I
good.
love that.
Yes.
To like see if it was looking tasty or not, or what?
I mean,
I
I
can
would
answer
like-
that.
Yes.
Because like it is all.
I was like, wait a minute, I got to answer for that.
I just want to meet the snake that finessed Adam and Eve.
Like it's always represented as an apple,
Nope.
and it's like.
Nope.
Okay.
Oh my god, I'm so ready for
Fig,
this.
isn't it? It's not an apple.
He's gonna figure it out.
I've seen apples. Figs are bad.
Okay, I'm sorry, Jaren. I got your hopes up. All I was thinking of was Eve looking at it and seeing, and she was saying that she thought it was delightful to look at. It was good to the eyes. But you're right in the sense that there's the detail that you want is not there. It's just Eve going, boy, that looks good. It's not like, well, it's blue, it's green, it's squishy, it's hard, it's crunchy. We don't know. Yeah, sorry, I missed that one.
Question, Caroline.
So one, I would ask for a hug, because I think it'd probably be the best hug I've ever had.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Two,
Oh, yeah.
I want to know the answers to all the murder mysteries.
Oh,
I
yeah.
Whoa.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I
Yo.
love the idea of going to heaven where we get to know all this stuff. We get to re-see all this stuff.
You get to see
History.
if Ted Cruz is a
mystery.
Zodiac killer.
Yes.
He is, but you get to see it.
But like you get answers to questions, and it's like questions that might not even
I mean, I don't know if I get answers.
matter
That's just
in
what
the
I would
grand
ask.
That's good. I like that.
That's what I've always come to understand, that we will know when we will understand the world, or what the world
Might
was.
not even care.
You know, it's
We
At that
might
point.
not even
it's good,
care.
Caroline, because you know the difference. You know, in Islam, there's Allah, right? And the eternal life for a Muslim is not so much Allah as it is paradise. So God isn't really the thing; it's all the stuff that God provides. But in Christianity, it's enjoying God forever. So part of that enjoyment of God is hugging Him, asking Him questions, interacting with Him. Muslims don't get that. There's no interaction with Allah. You get the virgins and the beautiful river and the trees and the fruit and all that stuff for being a martyr, but you don't get there's no revelation in the Quran that shows you that
You get no peace of mind.
right. You don't get to interact with Allah. He's still like, no, don't talk to me. You know.
Yeah. Okay, so what's your question?
Oh.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
You don't just get to answer
No,
that.
no, no, no,
own.
no, no. I think.
I
Okay.
might have an answer.
Okay.
Oh, the turns have tabled.
I would probably, the one question I've had for years and years and years is, why did the Lord let my father pass the way he did? Why didn't He intervene and let me have a dad? Because the things I've struggled with in my adult life are dad issues. I can honestly say I'm afraid of getting married because I don't have a good dad model. I had I had my father and two grandfathers who were committed adultery. So I don't have good role models. And so I would say, Lord, you know all the struggles that I've had because I've not had a father. And He's like, I know. But I would still say, why did you let that happen? Because I'm envious. And also, I'm envious of guys who are good dads. I realize they're not without problems, but I would like to have a dad. And I do in my Heavenly Father. He has been a dad to me. But I would still ask Him why that way. not like I'm I've gone through the, oh, why did you do that? I've gone through that. I'm past that. It was just, now it's just like, well, how come?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, how come?
What about you, Carson?
And Steph.
And Steph. You guys both have to answer this.
What would I ask the Christian God?
I mean, if you have another
I don't
question
think
to
you
ask
could
another
ask
god.
Allah anything. He wouldn't answer you even if you could.
What about can I ask like
Vishnu?
can I ask like Vishnu something?
Sure.
I don't know if you could figure out which of the hands is
Yeah.
covering his face.
I'd ask that.
Which one of the hands?
What's
Where are you?
Yeah. What does your face look like?
Can I get some help conceptualizing you?
I mean, what wouldn't I ask?
What?
I think my question would need some explaining, I guess. But my question honestly would just be why did you treat people like that? That's just so. No, I can't. I don't. Honestly, I don't think that's a question. I think I'd just be like, oh, I really don't like you. I'd be a little bummed. I'd be a little bummed that he was really that if this is all true, I'd be bummed. I'd be upset. I guess on like a nice question would be like.
I mean, you don't have to.
Be a nice
You don't have to.
question.
Okay, well then that's my question. Like,
Ask Job questions.
Like ask Job questions, like ask
Yeah.
Job, or
Job-like
ask
questions.
Job-like questions. Yeah, I
Because
guess
God
that would
handled
be my.
that pretty well.
I'd actually.
handled
Why
it.
did you do that to poor Job? That'd be one of my questions
You
too.
gotta be like, to teach him a lesson.
Yeah, and I'd be like, oh,
Well, because Satan was like, "Oh, I bet he wouldn't do
interesting.
that," and God was like,
No.
"Bet."
yeah, and then
That
he
was
killed,
Job.
Have you
and
all
then he
seen,
killed his whole family.
Have you
Yeah, I
all
was like,
seen?
I mean, God didn't.
Have you all seen Devil Wears Prada?
Yes.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
No.
Love
What's
that.
Stanley Tucci's character's name?
I don't know because I only know Miss Stanley.
Okay,
Tucci,
wait.
but
Let me.
continue.
Okay, wait. Let
Stanley
me.
Tucci's the bald guy.
Do I need to do a Google?
It's
Hang on.
The gay
It's
guy.
it's almost there.
Nigel.
Nigel.
Nigel. Thank you.
There it is.
Nigel.
What did I
Okay,
just say?
so the beginning of the movie, Meryl Streep's character, Miranda Priestley, sure, her chiropractor appointment or had a spinal injury or something, and she couldn't. She had an appointment that was canceled, and so she's coming into work early. So the whole Emily Blunt character is she goes into a tizzy, she hangs up the phone. She's here, you know. She's
Yeah.
coming. You know?
Yes.
And
That was like-
everybody's just then the whole office goes into a
That's at the
frenzy,
very
and then
beginning. Yeah.
and then what's the other character? What's
Anne Hathaway's
Anne
character.
Hathaway's
Andy?
character? She's just Andy's
Andy.
standing there going. And then Tucci opens up a glass door and he says, "Gird your loins, people."
Yeah.
You know, and that comes right out of Job. That is what the "gird your loins" is the King James for what God says to Job. Now you know what that means in Middle Eastern terminology.
Protect your.
Well, in the Middle East, they had skirts or
Yeah.
robes. They didn't wear pants because of the heat and stuff. So when you went to battle, you'd turn your robe, and you'd tie it up and tie it around your waist, and you'd get ready to run. And so that was a way to get ready to ask questions. So
It's like another way of saying like buckle up.
yeah, buckle
kind
up,
of.
get ready.
Yeah.
Let me. I will question you, and you will answer me.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times God will graciously, he can handle any kind of question. But I think when we ask, be ready to just be prepared for the kind of response. And it's sometimes very gentle, sometimes it's not, sometimes it brings tears, sometimes it's gut-wrenching, sometimes it's... But I think we make light of God, and we play with him, and we think light thoughts, and we don't think about him, and we hate him. And Carson, everything you've said, you know, I would be disappointed to find out before God. I think it's going to be a very uncomfortable thing. You know, it's going to be joyful, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be hard, and he knows that. Better ask him now and get answers while you can. You know, find out, research, look into it, and ask hard questions. Go through Job and do it, and be willing to, and have somebody that can be a human person to help you answer through those questions as well.
I do. I'm surrounded by them, actually.
That's very good. See, you're in a good place.
Mm-hmm. I am.
Yeah. So it's
Okay,
okay to
yeah.
be, it's okay to do what Job did and feel that way. I think so. I wouldn't put you down for it.
No, yeah, I wouldn't think.
You can't
I
make
think it's a
progress
reasonable
without
way to
having,
be-
you can't make progress without wrestling with God. You know what the name Israel means?
What does it mean?
He who wrestles with God.
Yeah. Is man, Ra, or mankind. Ra is evil struggle. and El is God. Ish, man, struggle, God. Humankind, mankind, struggle, God. That was Jacob's new name. He wrestled, Genesis 32. Jacob puts all his, he moves. He packs the U-Haul, sends it across the river, and he's alone in the desert, and a man comes and wrestles with Jacob all night long. What is that? It's the angel of the Lord. That's God coming down and wrestling with his own creation all night long. And Jacob's like, who are you? Why do you want to know my name? And so it's God wrestling with Jacob, and he lets Jacob win. But not without a little tap on the hip.
Sure.
And Jacob limped for the rest of his life. But he got his name. But he won. God let him win. And that's a picture of the cross. Go wrestle with God, and he like you wrestle with your 3-year-old niece. You're like, oh, you won, right? But God really lets us do that. When he came down, what did we do? We wrestled him to the ground, and we killed him, and we put him up on the cross, and he got as low as he could. He got inside a grave. He let us do it. But he won. And then now he tells us that, hey, look, I won. You're limping, but come to me. I love you.
So, Carson, when you come back home limping, I'm going to say you get all the answers you wanted.
Yes.
Well, I'd just like to say that my name is Carson.
What did I call you?
No, I'm not saying you didn't. I'm just saying
Carson, right?
we're figuring out what Israel means.
Yeah,
That's the name it means, whatever. And my name is Carson. And you want who named me that? My mom and dad.
Oh, I don't understand.
My point is, yeah, so I'm not thinking of it as like I'm wrestling with God. I'm thinking of it as like I'm trying to find the truth. And so if I'm finding things that are not compatible with this, and I'll find things that are, I'm sure, eventually. But I think I'm just not seeing it in terms of like, I'm going to ask God this question, because I think the truth is here, and I don't think it's that. I think it's difficult to find, but I don't think it's that difficult to find.
Okay, Agent Mulder, we see you.
And so, like, when I say, well, my name is Carson and my parents named me that, I'm saying, like, that's who I come from, because I'm just Carson. And I don't think there was a God who made me, because I know who made me, you know what I mean? But yeah, that would be my question. It'd be, what's wrong with you? This would be my question to God. Stephanie, would you like to ask a question?
You don't get out of this. Stephanie, ask a question.
Yeah. I had to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
The atheist had to ask the question. You have to ask a
Brought up to
question.
the microphone.
She would ask, why do I have to ask a question?
Yeah, right? She'd be like,
Thanks,
why
God.
do I have to do this? Can't you just banish me already?
Honestly,
Assault.
kind of like Carson, being an atheist.
the microphone.
She's like, why can't I find screws for my glasses?
Why do my glasses come
Where are all the things that Stephanie have lost in her life?
Free contacts would be good.
Under
right
the
now.
couch.
It'd be
Oh,
amazing.
man.
It'd be so amazing. But honestly, I could probably go all night with all the different questions I have for him, because there's just so many that I'm just like, I don't really understand you. Oh, sorry. There's just so many that I'm just like, I don't understand why this works out the way that works out, air quotes, in the Bible. Like, I don't know. Again, how did freshwater fish survive during the Great Flood? Great Flood. Why if his word is so important for us to know, if it is so important for us to be able to follow his rules and get to know him, why make it so difficult? Why is it that we have so many different denominations of him? Why is it that we have so many different religions? Why is it that? And all these people who are studying all these different denominations, all these different religions, they actually feel like they're doing something good. Like, they feel that they are absolutely in the right. So, I get a lot of people who I'm like, so why is it that you think that, either Christianity or just any religion, why is it that you feel that your religion is the true one? And, most of the answers I always get is, well, because I feel like it is, because this is what feels right to me. I know that this is, like, if I study the Bible, this is what, or if I study the Quran or whatever it is, everyone gives me the same answers. Like, this is my faith, and I truly believe in it. And it always resorts back to faith. But why is it that if
because it really is a life or death
Mm-hmm.
thing for us to be able to know this. And he says, it says he is love. He he wants us to be able to, for each and every one of us to go either to heaven, paradise, be reincarnated or whatever. That is like the ultimate goal for us. That is what he wants for us. So then why is it there's so many different interpretations, so many ways that you can go wrong when you truly feel like you're going right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know something I would say to you is that if this isn't true, then I don't have anything.
Well, that's not necessarily
Which,
true.
I mean, I know that if I wasn't faithful,
Mm-hmm.
can I get emotional? Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
If I didn't think that there was a reason why God put me through everything he put me through, I would have killed myself so long ago. Because I understand that the only reason why I can grow and I can understand myself is that God, I can look back in situations in my life and see that God had a reason for me to learn that lesson. And they all sucked. And they were all awful. And I would never want anybody to go through that. But that's the only way that I can justify the things that have happened to me and the reason why I still think that I deserve to be on this planet. So personally, I wouldn't have anything. And I think that my faith has made me who I am, and I don't know if I found out. Because, I mean, I know I could die and nothing could be there. I mean, this is entirely on faith. Like, we can say, like, there is, there's science that goes with it and whatever, but, like, we don't know. Well, we don't know a lot of things. But, like, my belief that there's something that's bigger than me, doing something that's bigger than me through me, is what keeps me going.
Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see.
Yeet.
And there's another... Go ahead, Amy.
I mean, if I may jump on this wagon too, and I don't mean to one-up you or anything, but I've been in the same boat where I did not see a point for living without God, where it's like, what do I have to live for? It would be so much easier on everyone around me if I was just gone, if I wasn't a burden to anybody. But God gives me a reason to survive, and he gives me a purpose, and that purpose is to spread that love to other people, because God always loves me. No matter what I do, no matter how much I mess up, God loves me and he forgives me. And he gives me a purpose to share that with others.
So I think it's a really good societal purpose of religion, even if we're wrong, which I'm sure we're wrong about a lot of things anyway, because, like, humanity, is that it pushes us to think that we can be more and that we have more planned for us and to try to put good out into the world, even if we don't necessarily see the returns of it.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing to consider about the excellent questions that we've all had about the multiplicity of denominations and interpretations, and people often very quickly will blame the Bible for that confusion. But in all likelihood, it's more the confusion. So in other words, the things that you bring up are common questions that people have, and they're good ones, and they're ones that caused me for a long time not to go to church before I was a Christian, even when I was thinking about God. But looking at all of the confusion and saying that, well, how come God hasn't cleared this up, is one way to interpret God, too. So you have to add that to the multiplicity of interpretations about God, because it's really what it boils down to is an interpretation that God is confusing, therefore he can't be known. Mm-hmm. And that's the ground level of that argument generally. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what your concern is, but underlying that is saying basically God is confusing and can't be known, therefore why bother? I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but I've talked to atheists who kind of have that take, and you have to understand that that's one interpretation of who God is. And it also assumes that God has not been clear. And I think the burden of proof lies upon the individual who says that God has not been clear. And every intelligent atheist I've ever talked to can articulate the gospel. And so whether or not there's a million denominations, if I asked somebody this the other day, Paul from the forum, Paul, he started emailing. We started emailing, and I'm like, Paul was like all up into the confusion business, and we can't know. And I'm like, Paul, you're on Jeopardy. It's the $1 Million Daily Double or whatever it is. You got the million. Who wants to be a millionaire? You got the question. And I said, who is Jesus Christ? And he answered it. And then I said, well, because he said, well, the Bible isn't clear. And then I went, I gave him 20 questions like I gave you, and he answered them all. And so what I'm saying is that a lot of times, I'm not saying you're doing this at all. I think that the argument is that the Bible is confusing and that we can't know it, and that people just kind of stop there, and they don't progress past that and say, well, if it is confusing, then the onus is for you to clear it up. Now, if after many years of studying it, you still think it's confusing, I'm not saying, again, I'm not being personal, but that's the thing. If it's confusing, well, what do? You try to clear up the confusion. And some people come to faith through that process. Some people walk away from it. But to just stop at the fact that it's confusing and we can't know it is not within the course of what Orthodox Christianity teaches. And like Megan and Emma and myself, I can add my suicidal thoughts to that. I don't take medication for depression. And I've been to counselors who want to medicate me, and I've been in hospitals, and, well, not as much as I've been counseled and all this stuff. I've never been hospitalized for it, but I've been to counselors and psychiatrists and doctors' offices. And I don't take medication because I've seen how God works through prayer and through other people, and I lean upon Christ to get me through those things. And if it wasn't for him, I remember the last time I tried to commit suicide was 10 years ago. I was in my car. I was going to do the same thing my dad did. And I turned on the keys, rolled down the windows. The car was going for about 30 seconds. And I was overcome with, all I can tell you is it was God's love. I turned the keys off. I was bawling like a 5-year-old. I went into the house and I called the only friend that I had at the time. And she asked me what was wrong because she was praying for me, and God told her that I was trying to kill myself. That was the last time I ever did it, because I saw Jesus intervene when I had nothing. And I was a Christian at the time. And that, personal experience, I think you have to look at, you got 3 people here sitting at the table who have all hit the bottom and have had nothing to lift themselves up by. And if Jesus wasn't real, if he wasn't the Lord of the universe, and he didn't reach down into our lives, there'd be 3 less people at this table right now. And I think that attests to, that is a legitimate, I wouldn't say proof, but that's a legitimate reality that I think we can all attest that none of us were strong enough to be able to save ourselves. I was ready. I was done. And I was, the whole measuring up and worrying and anxiety. But through people's prayers and me coming up here, Jesus Christ is the Lord, and he is real. And his love for you all, I didn't know who was going to be there, but he is real. He loves you, and he loves you, and he knows you, and he wants us to have a relationship with him. And that's the beauty of the Christian faith. You can have a relationship with the God of the cosmos. But I understand your questions.
Yeah.
They're very real. They're
and it's a really good perspective, even as a Christian, to think of that question. And like, if you went up and asked God, like, why?
Yeah.
Why you believe that is what, like, the truth, and why it's still good. Yeah.
So they're hard questions, and they're good, and they're questions we have all had at some point. But I think we have to be. It's funny, you don't think about being good stewards of questions, but I think there's a stewardship issue with questions. So the return is, well, what are you going to do with an answer? Mm-hmm. Right? What are you going to do? How are you going to, if I give you an answer, what are you going to do with it? What do you want me to do? What are you going to do with that information?
Yeah.
And that's basically what God's response is to Job. Why do you want to know? What are you going to do with that knowledge? Even if I tell you, what's the point of your inquiry? Do you really want to know? Or are you just playing
no,
fistica? Not you.
No, yeah.
But that generally is, Dan, why do you want to know that question? Because I want to have an excuse for not doing something, right? And that's a parenting thing, right? Why do you want to know that, son?
God, the most patient parent.
Yeah. But God patiently feels those things. So I'm not trying to make you feel bad for asking at all.
No. I don't feel bad at all. I totally understand your guys' answers. I still feel like, you know, I'd still like to hear it from him to for him to actually be able to answer that for me.
Oh, we all do.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know, if
Right.
he is,
That's absolutely.
yeah. Like if he is real, like I would really want the answer, and it's the reason I want the answer.
Yeah.
Is because, you know, so many good people who don't, like, we can say people who study the Quran or whatever. There's some good people who study it, and they actually believe that this is the right thing for them to be doing. This is the right way for them to be going. So, or like, yeah, atheists, yeah, or like, you know.
Yeah, we all have a possession. I mean, it's not just religion.
Yeah.
Everybody's on a path they think is the absolute right way to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's so many people who think it's the right way to go. And then for these people to be punished for not going the right way when it's not really clear, that to me seems very harsh.
Well, and I think the issue there probably is the clarity.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about evidence. It's not clear, right? If there was evidence, it would be clearer.
Well,
right?
I'm not even
I'm not
saying like you don't have to give me like all the evidence of how everything was created, how everything happened. Just have it be clear, because these people, like, I don't know. When I was growing up, one of the hardest things for me to understand when I was growing up a Jehovah's Witness is why my dad was not going to be able to be in paradise with me, because he was, you know, didn't really want to study the Bible and everything. And I knew my dad was a great person. I know my dad's a great person. You know, he's not perfect, of course, because no one is.
No.
And I know he's a good person. So why is that? Because he did not see the way that God wanted him to see, or, you know, why is it that he wasn't able to understand what I supposedly understood back then as a Jehovah's Witness? Why is it that he's going to get punished and not get to be in paradise with me? Because that to me wouldn't be a paradise at all.
Yeah.
If I was in some heaven, if I was in some paradise, some afterworld, reborn somewhere, and I knew people who were genuinely good people were not going to be there. People that I loved, people that I knew were good people were not going to be there because of their choices that they made.
Yeah.
According to faith that was not clear to them.
So do you believe, if you don't mind me asking a question, do you believe God has not been clear enough? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I believe God has not been clear enough. Not clear enough to the point where something so dire to me, like he's left it very loose.
So
if he was real.
So if he has, how would you, I guess my other question, how would you know if he was clear? What would be evidence for you that he was being extremely clear?
Well, you know, it's mentioned that he used to speak to people. I'm sure if we had questions, he would like
Speak up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
yeah. Speak to me. Let me know these things. And I know people keep saying like, you know, he's spoken through me through prayer, but like, there's so many different people who say they've spoken to me. There's people who've committed huge crimes.
But for you, how would you know God is speaking to you? Not what other people are saying. Well, how do you know God would say? You'd be hearing God's voice. What would it sound like? What would it be like? How would you know that this is God being clear for you, just like you wanted?
I don't know, just like me hearing your voice, me hearing Caroline's voice. You know, it's said that he's all powerful. So if he's all powerful, there must be an ability for him to be able to speak to me, for me to know that it's him, for me to be able to hear him like I hear you, like I hear Caroline.
Do you think you could hear him through us?
No, I do not believe that, because
so there's the thing right there. Your standard of clarity of God's voice versus the way God has chosen to communicate, because we believe He does communicate through us and through His Word. But you're looking for clarity is kind of shutting down one venue just automatically because it's not. So you set up a standard. You're saying I haven't heard it yet. I haven't heard it the way I want to hear it. So He's not revealed it to me yet, is what you're saying.
Well, it's more of like I want for everyone to be able to understand what is right from wrong. Like I do not. It's not. I don't feel it's fair that there's so many people who believe this is the right way, and other people that believe that that's the right way. Like if we could all come, if there was some way for Him to be telling us, put it into every one of us, like here's the right way, and for us to all know that that is the right way and know what is the wrong way. I feel like that would have been the best way for Him to know who is deserving of paradise, who isn't deserving of paradise, who is deserving
Some
of
might
hell.
argue that would be the Bible.
Well, yeah, some might argue that it's that. Some might argue it's the Quran.
Right.
Some might argue it's some other form of, you know, their religion's
So then
textbook.
would it be those people who are also like, I don't know. To me, how you're describing it is like you want to know to the point where you cannot deny it.
Yes.
Like it's point, like it's in my face, like
yes.
bam.
Yes. Just like
yeah.
you know, if you're gonna be hanged for something, you're gonna want to know. Am I
know,
supposed
black
to
and white.
choose, am I
What
supposed
did
to
I
choose
do?
the red button? Or am I supposed to choose the blue button? You're
Yeah.
gonna want to know. So this is something that is that dire. Am I gonna be able to live?
So you
in
know
some
it's so you know
paradise?
it's serious.
I know it's serious. If it's
How
a
do
real,
you know it's serious?
Because if it is a real thing, there's always an extreme. There's always a paradise
Yeah.
versus a non-existent state. There's always a heaven or a hell. There is a getting an afterlife and, you know, living to a higher standard, or, you know, living in the lowest standard that you can, or, you know, again, being completely a non-existent.
So is that? I guess I'm wondering. Do you think that God has told you that, or is that just man-made? From what
Well-
the way you're saying it, I'm not like trying to argue. I'm just wondering. Do you think that what you just described is man-made, or do you think God has really revealed those things?
Well, see, that's the thing. I don't know whether it is him or if it is God. If it's God or it's humans, because everyone has their own interpretation of it.
So you're
So-
not sure if it's God or not.
I'm not sure if there even is a God that's able to say that it is. To me, it's all humans saying, this is this, this is that. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
I completely
We can still
forget
hear
that
you.
it's
We're just
right
having
here.
really great
There's fine.
conversation. We want other people to
I'm
hear you as
sorry.
well.
I am not used to this. I'm
So
used to like
so the
Yeah.
so
Sorry, I'll
it's
leave.
at one time
Yeah.
you're kind of struggling with an agnosticism you want clarity for, but on the other hand you're saying I'm not really sure what God would look like if He showed up and told me.
Well, yeah, but I feel like since God is all powerful, He would be able to put that knowledge into us some way or another. I mean, Adam and Eve were able to know what is wrong from right.
Yeah.
You know, something so dire for them to know, do not eat from this. It's either you eat from this tree or this. Yeah, it was
the
a
knowledge
tree, right?
the
Yeah.
knowledge
Yeah.
of the tree of good and evil.
I think he
The
was
tree of the
plenty
knowledge of good
clear.
and evil.
Yeah, he was plenty clear with that.
Yeah.
So why is it that he cannot be plenty clear with us when it's something just as dire?
But you know that, right? You know that that was clear enough for you to be able to tell us that. You just don't know if that's the right way to go or not.
I know that it was clear for them.
But I mean, like you telling the story, you know that story's clear. You know what happened there, right? They
I
ate
know.
it and they
I
fell
know it
and
from
they-
reading it. I
Yeah,
don't know if it
but you
actually
don't know-
happened.
But you don't know if that's God speaking or not, right? That's what you're
What
saying.
if all along that they heard that, don't eat this fruit, and they're like, how do I know that's you?
How do I know
and then
that's
they ate it.
fruit?
I think she's trying to argue it's because it's like there's so many denominations and they all think that like if you don't do something, then
Oh
it's
yeah,
bad.
no,
That it's
right.
like from the standpoint of
Right.
God. it's
So
like,
why doesn't
why
God
wouldn't I
clear
want
up?
you all to
Yeah, I
do-
understand.
Yeah,
that.
that's why church
Yeah.
council meetings
Yeah.
take 4 hours because everybody thinks that God told them that their opinion was right.
That's exactly. yeah,
A show
yeah.
that I think you would really enjoy
Uh-huh.
is called Joan of Arcadia, and it's got Amber Tamblyn, so obviously it's perfect. And the whole concept is that God keeps appearing to her as like different people and keeps telling her to do the weirdest things. Like he's like, build a boat, and she's like, excuse me, and then she like ends up rekindling her relationship with her like brother. I think you would really enjoy that concept. Like it's really interesting. I think everybody would like it, but
I think
that's what I was thinking is like, because God was telling her and she didn't understand at all, and then like she joins a chess team and she ends up like making this amazing like connection between two people who are super broken. So it's like that weirdness of God telling her to do things even though he was explicit, and it's very confusing and an incredible show.
I guess I think the confusion comes from human beings, and
I am confusion. America, explain.
But I agree with you, Steph. I can definitely understand that, like how I can see how every denomination, every religion think that they're right, because otherwise there wouldn't be one.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's interesting. And I don't know who is the best one to follow, or if they're all the best ones to follow. I don't know.
do you see, Steph, that you kind of see yourself as a mini denomination in the way you're approaching the question, though, too?
I do not. How is it that I?
Well, you're so when I say mini denomination, I say you're offering a perspective. You're offering a kind of theological perspective that what I'm hearing you're saying is God hasn't cleared, because there are all these other things, that must mean that God has not cleared up the confusion. That's what I'm hearing you saying. Am I not hearing that right? I'm trying to repeat your argument
No, it's
so I
like-
can understand what, I don't want to misrepresent it. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
you're saying that because of the multi-denominationals that obviously we all see, that for you is evidence that God has not spoken clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
If he is even there, yes.
So that's how your argument is. You're going with that. God hasn't spoken clearly because all of these denominations exist. Could God have spoken clearly and still these denominations exist?
I don't feel like there could. I understand that there is a devil who's always trying to. Well, I understand that in the sense of being a Christian, there is a devil who is always trying to make it hard for you to follow the right path because he wants you. I didn't know how to put that.
I didn't even mean to go that far with it. I was
Yeah.
just wondering if you thought maybe there was a possibility that God was very clear despite the denominational variety that does exist.
No, in that term, I would not think that there would be denominations like that because, like I said, or even as Caroline mentioned, if these people were to know the absolute truth and these people, who are truly good people who are in all these different denominations, all these different religions, they would know which one to follow.
Do you think there's enough agreement with mainstream denominations to form a core of God's voice? Find like what they all agree upon and see if that's not maybe God's voice? Do you think that's possible?
Well, there is a lot of common things like
you could name like 10 common things that most Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox would have in common.
Yeah, but I could also name a whole bunch of different things that they do not agree upon.
Oh yeah, sure. No, I'm not
critical to
downplaying that. But in trying to discern what God's voice might have been, I guess I was just curious as to how you might go about starting that.
Well, everyone believes that there is a higher being. Everyone believes that you have to be this a good person. Now, their interpretation of good person could vary in vast different.
Like good paint.
Yeah,
or perhaps a fellowship of some sort.
Yeah, there's some kind of rules that you have to follow
Okay.
to be a good person.
Yeah. But all of the denominations, this is just an aside, I did a study, I was just doing a research paper the other day about the many different ways in which Jesus is mentioned throughout history. You have Roman historians, you have Paul, you have scholars, you have even astronomers in a 21st century book on exoplanets mentions Jesus. Who do you say Jesus is?
To be honest, as an atheist, I feel like Jesus was some guy who just was like, look at all the things that I can do, but nothing was really there, just wanted the attention. As someone who grew up as a Jehovah's Witness.
So you think he really existed anyway? You think he did?
I would think so. I wasn't really there, so I can't really say. I haven't seen any. I mean, there's like that's fair. There's no concrete evidence that he was here, other than like the Bible, and it's said that his body was not found after he was
ascended into heaven.
So I feel like that just made it a lot harder for people to say that. But
we can't go find Jesus.
We can't just go.
Or
find
Moses.
Yeah, I was about to say,
or Moses was buried.
Exactly. So
you're iffy on the historical aspect of who Christ is.
I'm pretty iffy on it.
And you're pretty sure he wasn't God.
I'm pretty sure he wasn't.
And you
God.
don't think the things that the Bible says he did, that they were made up?
Yeah, I feel like it might have been some kind of folklore that people just kind of pass on to just have morality, have hope after.
All I was setting up there was answering your question about why I called you a mini denomination.
Okay.
Because you just outlined a doctrine about who Jesus was.
Right.
And that's what denominations do. I mean, they take particulars about who God is or who Jesus is, and they put it out there and they say, here's what I think. So if I'm on the outside looking at your denomination, why should I believe what you're saying is true?
Well, that's the thing. I can't tell you that it's true that he was just some guy running around because, like I mentioned to you, I do not know if he even existed. There's no evidence I can provide to you and be like, here it is. This is why he existed, other than, the Bible, which is a swayed, which can be seen as a swayed source.
This is a beautiful conversation, but I have a final at 10:30 in the morning, and I have to write an entire paper for it because I am irresponsible.
Speaking of which.
But we could
email
each other.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Carson has my email, and you guys all of you are free to stay in touch with me.
Awesome.
Definitely.
I really would like to stay in touch with
Don't forget,
everybody.
look at Matthew Vines.
And send
sure I
her
will.
your address so I can give you a Martindale hat.
He found a place that runs and it's my middle name, and it's really exciting.
It's a feed store that says Martindale Feed.
It's
Mill.
exciting. We're going to get it figured out. It's great. So, Carson, do you have any words, or should we?
All right, guys. Well, that's been.
That's enough for the next.
Yeah, this
Oh,
is
so
definitely
fucking
this has definitely been a splendid conversation. I really appreciate how candid and open everyone was. I hope we can continue to further the tradition of healthy disagreements, such as we've done tonight. Thank you, Dan, for buying us dinner and making us pie, and driving all the way to Kansas from Texas.
Really.
It was
Just
really
just to
fun.
sit in this studio for a couple of hours and
No,
talk
that
to
was
us. So.
great.
And thank you to all my other guests. You've also been very outstanding, every last one of you. Any last comments? Did everyone have fun?
I'm still a Taurus.
Oh, that was so good.
All right, guys. Well, this has been Coalition M. I'm your host, Carson Lopez. I'll see you guys after break, I guess.